Every biker carries a ghost. But only one man rode through a Missouri storm and found a 5-year-old girl standing alone beneath a dying gas station light. Bruised arms hidden under sleeves too long for summer, eyes that had already learned the world was not safe. She whispered 4 words to a stranger in a leather vest. 4 words that turned an outlaw's silence into a war no one saw coming. What Colt Mercer did next will shatter everything you think you know about the men who ride. But what he discovered about Lily's missing mother, that's the part that'll keep you up tonight. Stay with me until the very end. Drop a like right now and comment your city. I want to know where you're watching from. Let's ride. The storm came sideways across Route 54 like something personal. Colt Mercer leaned the Heritage Softail into the wind and squinted through water that hit his face like gravel. His leather was soaked through. The bandana around his neck had gone cold against the scar tissue that climbed from his left collarbone to just below his jaw. A gift from Fallujah, 12 years healed and still burning when the weather turned. He hadn't planned to stop, hadn't planned much of anything in the last 6 months, if he was being honest. Just fuel, black coffee, and the kind of silence that only came from 70 miles an hour on an empty highway with nothing behind you worth remembering. But the Softail was running hot. The rain was turning to something heavier, not quite ice, not quite mercy, and the gas station appeared through the gray like a hallucination. Faded canopy, 2 pumps that looked older than the highway itself, a flickering neon sign that read open in letters that couldn't quite commit to the word. He pulled under the canopy and killed the engine. The silence was worse than the storm. Inside, the station smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. A woman behind the counter, mid-60s, reading glasses on a chain, name tag that said Doris, looked up from a crossword puzzle and decided Colt wasn't worth the effort of fear. She'd seen bikers before. She'd seen worse. "Restrooms for customers," she said without looking up again. "I'll take coffee." Colt peeled a wet 5 from his wallet and set it on the counter. Water dripped from his jacket onto the cracked linoleum. Whatever's hot. Everything's hot. This is Missouri in August during a thunderstorm. Pick your poison. He almost smiled. Almost. The coffee was terrible. He drank it standing by the window, watching the rain hammer the parking lot into something that looked like a shallow river. His truck was back in Fulton with a blown transmission. The bike was all he had left, and even she was complaining. He'd ride it out. He always did. That was the trick they'd taught him in the desert. Not how to survive, but how to stop caring whether you did. That was when he saw her. She was sitting on the floor behind the chip rack, wedged between a display of motor oil and a stack of newspaper bundles that nobody had come to collect. A kid. 5, maybe 6. Brown hair that hadn't seen a brush in days, tangled and pushed behind ears that were too small for the worry they carried. She wore a long-sleeved shirt, purple, faded, 2 sizes too big, and clutched a pink backpack against her chest like it was the only thing between her and the end of the world. Her eyes found Colt's boots first, then climbed. She didn't flinch. That was the part that got him. Kids flinch. Kids see a 6'2" man in a soaked leather vest with a jaw that looked like it was carved for arguments, and they flinch. She didn't. She just stared at him with eyes that had already done their flinching somewhere else, with someone who was supposed to be safe. Colt looked at Doris. "She with you?" Doris glanced over. Something complicated moved across her face. Guilt, maybe, or the exhaustion of a woman who'd already made her peace with looking the other way. "She's with the man who brought her in. He's in the restroom. Been in there a while." "How long's a while?" "Long enough." Colt set his coffee down. He walked to the chip rack slowly, the way you approach a dog that's been hit too many times. He crouched. His knees cracked like gunshots in the quiet store. The girl pressed herself harder against the wall. "Hey," he said. Nothing else. Just the word. Flat. No performance. She watched him. "You hungry?" A pause. Then a nod so small that barely qualified as movement. He stood, grabbed a bag of peanut butter crackers from the rack, and set them on the floor in front of her. Then he backed away. 3 steps. Enough distance to let her breathe. She reached for the crackers with her left hand. The sleeve pulled back. Colt's jaw tightened. The bruise was fresh, purple-black, the kind that comes from fingers, not falls. It wrapped around her forearm like a handprint from someone who didn't care about breaking things that were small enough to break easily. There were older marks beneath it, yellow, green, a calendar of pain written on skin that should have never known anything worse than a scraped knee. He didn't react, not outwardly, but something behind his ribs shifted. A gear that hadn't turned in years, rusted and grinding, but turning now with the kind of force that doesn't ask permission. "What's your name?" he said. "Lily. Lily. That's a good name." He crouched again, slower this time. "Lily, where's your mom?" The question landed like a stone dropped into deep water. The girl's eyes went somewhere else, not away from him, but inward, to a place where the answer lived alongside things she'd been told not to say. Her fingers tightened on the backpack strap. "Gone," she whispered. "Gone where?" She shook her head. Not a refusal, a confession that she didn't know. Then she said it. 4 words, barely louder than the rain against the windows, but they hit Colt Mercer harder than anything that had ever come at him in a combat zone, harder than shrapnel, harder than the letter from the VA that told him his file was closed and his benefits were under review, harder than waking up at 3 a.m. in a motel room with his hand already reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "He hurts me." Colt didn't move. His hand stayed on his knees, his breathing stayed even. But inside, in the place where the war had hollowed him out and left nothing but scar tissue and silence, something caught fire. He looked at Doris. She was watching. She'd heard. "You call anyone?" he asked. Doris set down her crossword pen. "And say what? I don't know their situation. Could be her father. Could be—" "Look at her arm." The sentence hung in the fluorescent air between them. Doris looked. The reading glasses slid down her nose. She pushed them back up with a finger that trembled just enough to confirm she wasn't as numb as she pretended. "I'm not getting involved," Doris said, but she was already reaching for the phone beneath the counter. "Yeah," Colt said, "you are." The restroom door opened. The man who came out was mid-40s, thick through the shoulders the way men get when they've spent more time in bars than gyms. Buzz cut gone to gray. A face that had been handsome once but had been worked over by something. Alcohol, anger, the slow erosion of whatever decency he'd started with. He wore a denim jacket over a stained thermal shirt and moved with the loose rolling walk of someone who expected the world to get out of his way. His eyes found Lily, then found Colt standing 3 feet from her. "The hell are you doing near my kid?" Colt straightened to his full height. He said nothing. Just stood there, his boots planted on the linoleum, his arms at his sides, his eyes flat and patient, the way they'd been flat and patient behind a scope in Anbar province when waiting was the weapon. "I asked you a question." The man took a step forward. His hands weren't fists yet, but they were thinking about it. "Step away from her." "She's hungry," Colt said. "I gave her crackers." "I didn't ask you to feed her. I didn't ask you for nothing." Another step. The man's breath reached Colt now. Sour, metabolized, the ghost of something cheap and brown that he'd been drinking before the rain started. "Lily, get up. We're leaving." Lily didn't move. Her eyes went to Colt. And in that look, in the raw animal logic of a child who had learned to read danger the way other kids learn to read picture books, she made a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She moved behind Colt's leg. Her small hand grabbed the wet leather of his vest at the hip. She held on. The man's face changed. Not anger, something colder. The expression of someone who was used to being obeyed by things smaller than him and who processed disobedience as a personal insult that required correction. "Lily, now." "She doesn't want to go with you," Colt said. "She's 5. She doesn't get to want." Something in those words cracked open a door Colt had spent a decade nailing shut. He heard his own father's voice. Different words, same architecture. The belief that children were property, that smallness was permission, that a closed fist was just a louder version of a raised voice. "She's not leaving with you," Colt said. The man stepped closer, close enough now that Colt could see the veins in his neck, the broken capillaries across his nose, the way his right hand was already curling. You don't know who I am. You don't know the situation. So you're going to step aside and I'm going to take my kid and you're going to get back on your little motorcycle and ride away before I make this a problem for you." Colt didn't step aside. He didn't raise his voice, didn't square his shoulders, didn't do any of the things that men do when they're performing strength for an audience. He just looked at the man the way you look at weather. Something that was happening, something that would pass, something that was not going to change the outcome of anything that mattered. "Doris," Colt said without turning around, "how's that phone call coming?" "They're sending someone," Doris said from behind the counter. Her voice had gone tight, the way voices go when people realize they've accidentally stepped into a story that's going to require something from them. The man heard it. His jaw worked. The calculation was visible. The flickering math of a man weighing his options. The biker was big. The biker was calm. The biker was not afraid of him, and that was a problem, because men like this one operated on fear the way engines operated on fuel. "Take it away," and they stalled. "This is kidnapping," the man said. "She's my kid." "Then you won't mind waiting for the police to sort it out." The word police did something to his face, a micro flinch, the kind of twitch that meant there were warrants somewhere, or a history that didn't look good under fluorescent light, or both. "I don't have to wait for nothing." "Yeah," Colt said. "You do." The standoff lasted 4 minutes. It felt like 40. The rain hammered the canopy outside. The fluorescent lights buzzed their tuneless song. Lily's hand stayed wrapped in Colt's vest, her knuckles white, her breathing shallow but steady, the breathing of a child who had learned that stillness was survival. The man paced. He made threats, vague, escalating, the kind that men throw when they know they've lost the physical negotiation and are trying to win on volume. Colt absorbed them the way the desert had taught him to absorb everything. Without reaction, without engagement, without giving the enemy anything to work with. When the cruiser pulled into the lot, its lights cutting blue and red through the gray rain, the man made one last play. He lunged for Lily's arm. Colt didn't hit him. He just moved. One step to the left, his body between the man and the girl, his hand catching the man's wrist the way you'd catch a branch swinging toward your face. No violence, just physics. The man's momentum carried him forward and Colt redirected it, guiding him past, away from Lily, into the empty space where the chip rack used to stand before the man's shoulder, clipped it, and sent bags of Doritos scattering across the floor. The deputies came through the door with hands on holsters and voices raised. 2 of them, both young, both tense, both reading the scene the way cops read scenes. Bodies, positions, who's standing, who's on the floor, where the child is. The child was behind the biker. The biker was calm. The man on the floor was not. It took 20 minutes to sort the first layer. The man's name was Dean Pruitt. He was not Lily's father. He was not her uncle. He was not any kind of legal guardian recognized by the state of Missouri or any other state. What he was, according to the expired driver's license in his wallet and the records that came back through dispatch, was a man with 2 prior arrests for domestic assault, a restraining order filed by a woman in Jefferson City, and an outstanding warrant for failure to appear on a DUI charge in Phelps County. What he was, according to Lily's bruises, was something worse. They put him in the back of the cruiser. He went quiet the way men go quiet when they realize the performance is over and the audience has stopped believing. The rain soaked through his denim jacket as they walked him across the lot, and Colt watched from the window without satisfaction. Satisfaction wasn't the feeling. The feeling was older than that, and heavier. The recognition that the world produced these men in endless supply, and that catching one was not the same as fixing the machine. Lily sat on the counter now, her legs dangling, the pink backpack in her lap. Doris had made her hot chocolate, instant, from a packet, stirred with a plastic spoon in a styrofoam cup. The girl held it with both hands and blew on it with the focused seriousness of someone performing a task that required all of her attention, because the alternative was thinking about what had just happened, and thinking was not safe yet. "Lily," the younger deputy said. He'd crouched down to her level the way they teach you in training. "Can you tell me where your mommy is?" She looked at Colt. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't the look of a child asking for help. It was the look of a child checking, making sure the tall man in the wet leather was still there, still solid, still between her and whatever was coming next. She checked, and he was there, and she turned back to the deputy. "Mommy went away," she said. "When did Mommy go away?" Lily's face did something that no child's face should know how to do. It went blank. Not confused, protected. The blankness of someone who had learned that certain questions came with consequences, and that the safest answer was no answer at all. "She went away," Lily said again, and she drank her hot chocolate. The deputy looked at Colt. Colt shook his head. Not now. Outside, the rain was letting up. The clouds had gone from black to gray to the color of dirty dishwater. The parking lot steamed. The second deputy was on his radio talking to someone about child protective services, about emergency placement, about the paperwork required to remove a child from a situation that had already removed itself. "What happens to her?" Colt asked the younger deputy. "CPS will place her. Emergency foster, most likely, until they can locate the mother or a relative." "How long does that take?" "Depends." "On what?" "On everything." Colt looked at Lily. She was peeling the label off the hot chocolate cup with her fingernail, methodical, careful, like it mattered. Like precision was the only thing she could control in a world that had stopped letting her control anything else. He thought about riding away. He was good at riding away. He'd ridden away from Fallujah, from the VA hospital in Springfield, from 2 relationships that had lasted long enough to prove he wasn't built for staying, from a mother's funeral he'd arrived at 3 hours late because the highway was the only place he could grieve without witnesses. He'd ridden away from everything that required him to stand still and feel something, because standing still was where the shrapnel lived, and feeling something was how you bled. But the girl was looking at him again, not asking, not begging, just looking, with the patient certainty of someone who had already been left enough times to know what it looked like when someone was calculating the distance to the door. "I'm not leaving," he said. He didn't know if he was talking to her or to himself. It didn't matter. The words landed in the same place. The CPS worker arrived 90 minutes later in a sedan that looked like it had been driven through every county in central Missouri without a single oil change. Her name was Patricia Holm, late 40s, tired eyes, a lanyard around her neck with too many ID badges from too many departments. She assessed the situation with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen this scene 100 times and had stopped being surprised by it 50 scenes ago. "Lily Ashford," she read from her tablet. "Mother is Sarah Ashford, last known address in Gasconade County. Father deceased, car accident 2021. No listed relatives in the state. Emergency foster placement pending." "Pending what?" Colt asked. Patricia looked at him over the tablet. She'd already been briefed on his role, the biker who'd intervened, the stranger who'd stood between the girl and the man. She processed him the way the system processed everything outside its categories. With suspicion first, gratitude never. "Pending availability. We're overloaded. Every county in the district is overloaded. We'll find her a placement, but it might take, how long? Could be tonight. Could be 3 days. We have a group facility and she's 5. I'm aware of her age, sir." Colt felt the old anger, the kind that had gotten him written up twice in the service. The kind that came not from violence, but from the recognition that systems built to protect people had been designed by people who had never needed protection. He breathed it down. Anger didn't help. Anger was just noise. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Nothing. You've done your part. The police have your statement." "And if I want to stay until she's placed?" Patricia studied him, the leather vest, the road-worn boots, the scar that crawled up his neck, the eyes that were hard and tired, and something else, something she didn't see often enough in the men who passed through her cases, something that looked like it might be the beginning of giving a damn. "That's not how this works," she said. "I'm not asking how it works. I'm asking if I can stay." Lily solved the argument. She slid off the counter, walked across the linoleum with her backpack dragging behind her, and sat down next to Colt's boot. She didn't touch him. She just sat there, close enough that the leather smell of his vest reached her, close enough that his shadow covered her, and she opened her backpack and pulled out a stuffed rabbit that had been loved so hard its left ear was barely attached. She held the rabbit in her lap and leaned against Colt's leg. Patricia Holm watched. Something shifted behind her professional mask. Not much, just enough to crack the protocol for a moment. She looked at Lily. She looked at Colt. She made a note on her tablet. "I'll make some calls," she said. Night came. Doris closed the station but left the lights on. She made more hot chocolate and a pot of coffee so bad it might have been a war crime. Colt sat on the floor next to Lily, his back against the counter, his long legs stretched across the linoleum. She'd fallen asleep against his arm, the rabbit pressed between them, her breathing finally slow and even for the first time since he'd seen her. He didn't move. His arm went numb. He didn't move. His phone buzzed. A text from Reno. Vice president of the Iron Veil MC, the club Colt had been riding with for the last 4 years. Reno's real name was Martin Delacroix, a former combat medic from Baton Rouge who'd traded field surgery for motorcycle maintenance and still couldn't sleep without the lights on. "Where you at?" "Church runs tomorrow. Priest is asking." Colt typed with one thumb, keeping his arm still so the girl wouldn't wake. "Stuck in Mary's County. Situation. Tell Priest I'll explain when I'm back. You good?" He looked down at Lily, at the bruises on her arm, at the way her small hand had curled around the edge of his vest in her sleep, holding on to leather and oil and road dust like it was the safest thing she'd ever touched. "No," he typed, "but I'm here." Patricia Holm returned at 11 p.m. with paperwork, bad news, and the expression of a woman who had spent 4 hours fighting a bureaucracy that treated children like inventory. "Emergency placement fell through," she said. "The family in Cole County can't take her until Friday. That's 3 days. "And until then?" "We have a temporary group facility and—" "No." The word came out flat and final. Not angry, not demanding, just the sound of a man who had spent his adult life watching institutions fail the people they were designed to protect, and had decided, in this gas station, on this night, that this particular failure was not going to happen on his watch. "Mr. Mercer, I understand your concern, but is there a legal way for me to provide temporary care while you locate placement?" Patricia blinked. "There's an emergency kinship provision, but it's typically reserved for relatives or established community members. You're a stranger who met her 3 hours ago. I'm the only person in this building she's not afraid of." That landed. Patricia looked at the sleeping girl, the way her body had folded toward Colt's, the way her breathing hadn't hitched once since she'd settled against him, the way her fingers held his vest with the unconscious certainty of a child who had found something worth holding. "I'd need to run a background check, fingerprints. You'd need to submit to a home inspection. I live on a motorcycle." "Then this conversation is over, Mr. Mercer." Colt closed his eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the canopy outside, counting seconds into puddles. He thought about the men he'd served with, brothers who'd died in places whose names the country had already forgotten, brothers who'd come home to systems that processed them like paperwork and discharged them into silence. He thought about the clubhouse back in Fulton, the empty room upstairs that Priest kept saying they should turn into storage. He thought about the promise he'd already made, the one he hadn't said out loud, but that Lily had heard anyway, because children don't listen to words. They listen to whether you stay. "I have a place," he said. "The club has property. It's not a mansion, but it's warm, it's safe, and it's got 4 walls and a door that locks. A motorcycle club. A brotherhood of veterans who spent their best years protecting strangers in countries they couldn't pronounce. Yeah, a motorcycle club." Patricia stared at him for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call that lasted 12 minutes. Colt heard fragments. Emergency provision, no viable alternatives, veteran, stable community affiliation, temporary, strictly temporary. And he held still the way snipers hold still, the way men hold still when the next breath might be the one that changes everything. She hung up. She looked at him. And the expression on her face was not approval. It was the grim, exhausted resignation of a woman who had run out of better options and was betting on the least worst one. 48 hours, she said. Supervised. I'll have someone check in tomorrow. If anything, and I mean anything, looks wrong, she goes to the facility. Are we clear? Crystal. And Mr. Mercer? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to something that wasn't a threat but lived in the same neighborhood. If I find out you're anything other than what you appear to be, I will bury you in paperwork so deep you'll need a lawyer and a shovel to see daylight again. Understood. Lily stirred. Her eyes opened. Not startled, not confused, just awake, the way animals wake, instantly present, instantly assessing. She looked at Patricia. She looked at Colt. She looked at the rabbit in her lap. "Are you staying?" she asked him. Colt Mercer, 41 years old, 2 combat tours, a back full of shrapnel scars, a heart full of rooms he'd locked and lost the keys to, looked at a 5-year-old girl in an empty gas station in the middle of Missouri and gave the only answer that mattered. "Yeah, kid, I'm staying." He carried her to the bike because she'd fallen asleep again, and he didn't have a car. Patricia followed in her sedan, already composing the incident report that would either save her career or end it. The rain had stopped. The highway was empty. The air smelled like wet asphalt and diesel and the particular silence that comes after storms when the world is too tired to make noise. He rode slow, 35 on a highway built for 70, with Lily bundled inside his jacket, her arms around his waist, her head against his chest, the stuffed rabbit jammed between them. It was reckless. It was probably illegal. It was the safest she'd felt in months, and he knew it because her grip loosened after the first mile. And by the second mile, she was asleep again. And by the third mile, Colt Mercer was crying for the first time since he'd come home from the war, the tears mixing with road mist and disappearing into the dark before anyone could see them. The Iron Vale Clubhouse sat at the end of a gravel road on the outskirts of Fulton, a converted farmhouse with a metal shop out back, a row of bikes under a corrugated awning, and a wooden sign above the door that read, "Nothing at all," because the men who lived there didn't need to advertise what they were. The lights were on. Of course they were. Reno had made calls. Colt pulled up to the porch and killed the engine. The front door opened. 3 men stepped out. Reno, tall, black, a surgical scar down his right forearm, and a calm that could talk down a hurricane. Hatchet, short, built like a fire hydrant, a former Army mechanic from outside Detroit who hadn't spoken more than 10 words in a row since 2014. And Priest, president of the Iron Vale, a man whose real name nobody used anymore, 62 years old with a silver beard and eyes that had seen the inside of 3 wars and still managed to look at the world like it was worth saving. They looked at Colt. They looked at the small shape sleeping inside his jacket. They looked at each other. Nobody asked questions. Nobody needed to. They'd all been the person standing between someone small and something terrible. That was why they rode together. That was the whole point. Reno went inside and came back with blankets. Hatchet cleared the upstairs room without being asked, moved the boxes, set up the cot, found a pillow that didn't smell like motor oil. Priest stood on the porch with his arms crossed and watched Colt carry the girl inside, and when Colt passed him, the old man put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed once, hard, and said nothing. Nothing was enough. Colt laid Lily on the cot. He tucked the blanket around her. He set the rabbit next to her pillow. He stood there in the dark room listening to her breathe, and he thought about Sarah Ashford, the mother whose name he'd learned from Patricia's tablet, the woman who had vanished, the ghost at the center of this story that nobody was telling him. Where does a mother go when she leaves her child with a monster? Downstairs, Priest was waiting with coffee. The good stuff. Not Doris's chemical weapon, but actual coffee, brewed in a press, served in a ceramic mug with no handle, because everything in the clubhouse was slightly broken, and that was fine. "Talk," Priest said. Colt talked. He told it straight. The gas station, the girl, the bruises, the man, the cops, the CPS worker, the 48 hours. Priest listened the way he always listened, with his whole body, his eyes never leaving Colt's face, his coffee going cold in his hands. When Colt finished, Priest set down his mug. "The mother," he said. "Sarah Ashford, last known in Gasconade County. Patricia said they'd look into it, but the system moves like molasses in January, and that girl doesn't have January." "No." Priest was quiet for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and stopped, like it had remembered that barking didn't fix anything. "You know what you're getting into," Priest said. It wasn't a question. "No, but I know what walking away looks like. And you can't do it. Not this time." Priest nodded. He picked up his phone. "I know someone. Rosa Bennett. Used to be a detective out of Osage County. Retired now, but she still works missing persons cases on her own dime because nobody else will. If anyone can find Sarah Ashford, it's Rosa. How do you know her? Priest's eyes went somewhere far away for a moment. To a year, a case, a debt that never got paid, or a wound that never quite healed. Because she found someone for me once, he said, when nobody else was looking. He dialed the number. It rang 3 times. And upstairs in the dark room that smelled like motor oil and old wood and the faintest ghost of cigarette smoke, Lily Ashford opened her eyes. She sat up in the cot. She looked at the unfamiliar ceiling, the unfamiliar walls, the rabbit beside her pillow. She reached into her pink backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Creased, water-stained, handled so many times the edges had gone soft. She unfolded it carefully, the way you unfold something that matters more than anything else you own. It was a photograph. A woman. Young, dark-haired, smiling at the camera with the kind of smile that people wear when they don't know someone is about to take everything from them. On the back, in handwriting that shook slightly, 4 words. I will come back. Lily pressed the photograph against her chest. She lay back down. She closed her eyes. And somewhere in the dark, beneath the sound of rain dripping from the gutters and the distant murmur of men's voices and the ticking of a clock that measured time in a house full of strangers who hadn't decided yet what they were willing to become, somewhere beneath all of that, a 5-year-old girl held a promise written by a mother who had disappeared and waited for someone to make it true. 300 miles south, in a town that didn't appear on most maps, a woman sat in the corner of a dark room with her knees pulled to her chest and her hands shaking and a bruise on her jaw that was 3 days old and turning the color of thunderclouds. She had no phone, no car, no money. She had a locked door between her and the hallway, and the lock was on the wrong side. She pressed her back against the wall and listened to the footsteps on the other side. They stopped, started again, stopped. She closed her eyes, and she whispered a name that the walls swallowed whole. Rosa Bennett answered on the 3rd ring with the voice of a woman who hadn't been sleeping and wasn't going to pretend she had. Priest, it's midnight. I know what time it is. Then you know this better be worth waking up for. Priest looked at Colt across the kitchen table. The coffee between them had gone cold. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked once, Lily shifting in the cot, and then went silent. Sarah Ashford, Priest said into the phone. Last known address, Gasconade County. Disappeared sometime in the last 3 to 4 weeks. Left behind a 5-year-old daughter who ended up in the custody of a man named Dean Pruitt, 2 priors for domestic assault, currently sitting in the Marys County lockup. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone who didn't care. The silence of someone calculating. How'd you get the girl? Rosa asked. One of my guys found her. Gas station on 54. The girl went to him. Your guy got a name? Colt Mercer. 2 tours, Afghanistan and Iraq. He's solid. Your definition of solid and mine aren't always the same thing, Priest. They are tonight. Another silence. Then the sound of a lamp clicking on, a drawer opening, a pen being uncapped. Rosa Bennett was 61 years old, retired from the Osage County Sheriff's Department with a citation for distinguished service and a liver that had earned its own commendation for surviving 30 years of department coffee. She'd spent the last 4 years of her career in missing persons and the last 3 years of her retirement doing the same work for free because the cases didn't stop just because the paychecks did. I'll pull what I can on Sarah Ashford tonight, she said. County records, last known employment, utility bills, anything with a paper trail. But Priest, if this woman is hiding, there's a reason. And if she's being hidden, there's a bigger reason. That's why I'm calling you. I'll be there by morning. She hung up. Priest set the phone down and looked at Colt. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be long. Colt didn't sleep. He sat in the hallway outside Lily's door, his back against the wall, his boots flat on the floor, his eyes open in the dark. He listened to her breathing through the thin wood, the small, shallow rhythm of a child who had learned to sleep lightly because deep sleep was where you couldn't hear the footsteps coming. Twice she cried out. Short, strangled sounds that weren't words but carried the shape of them. The ghost of a scream compressed into something small enough to survive. Both times Colt opened the door and stood in the frame, Not entering, not speaking, just letting his shadow fall across the floor until her breathing slowed and the cot stopped shaking. The second time she opened her eyes. "You're still here," she said. "I'm still here." She closed her eyes. Her hand found the rabbit. She pulled it closer. Colt went back to the hallway. He pressed his palms flat against the floorboards and felt the cold seep into his fingers, and thought about Sarah Ashford in a locked room 300 miles away, and he wanted to ride through the dark until he found her, but he couldn't leave the girl, and that was the trap. The beautiful, terrible trap of caring about something small enough to break. Morning came gray and mean. The sky looked like concrete. Frost had crept across the gravel lot overnight, turning the bikes into sculptures of chrome and ice. Inside the clubhouse, the smell of bacon and bad decisions filled the kitchen where Hatchet was cooking breakfast with the silent intensity of a man defusing a bomb. Lily sat at the table with her backpack on the chair beside her. She ate scrambled eggs with her fingers. Nobody corrected her. Nobody tried to make conversation. The men moved around her like water around a stone, not avoiding her, but giving her the space to exist without being watched, without being assessed, without being another item on someone's checklist. Reno sat across from her, eating toast and reading a motorcycle parts catalog. Without looking up, he slid a glass of orange juice across the table until it touched her plate. She looked at the juice. She looked at Reno. She drank it. That was the whole interaction. It was enough. Colt stood on the porch with coffee, watching the road. His phone had 17 missed messages, 3 from a woman in Jefferson City he'd been sleeping with occasionally and without enthusiasm, 2 from a VA counselor whose appointments he'd stopped keeping 6 months ago, and 12 from various Iron Veil members who'd heard, through the network of rumor and radio silence that constituted club communication, that Colt Mercer had brought a child to the clubhouse. The 12th message was from a man named Boone. "You out of your mind? We're not a daycare. Church meeting, tonight. Don't be late." Colt read it twice. He put the phone in his pocket. Rosa Bennett arrived at 9:15 in a truck that was older than most of the men in the club. She was a small woman, 5'3", wiry, with gray hair cut short and practical, and eyes that processed a room the way a combat veteran processes a room, which is to say she counted exits first and people second. She wore jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt, and no jewelry, except a watch that had stopped working 2 years ago, but that she kept wearing because her dead husband had given it to her, and taking it off felt like a second funeral. She walked into the clubhouse without knocking. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at Lily eating eggs with her fingers. She looked at the rabbit on the table. Then she looked at Colt, and something crossed her face that might have been recognition. Not of him specifically, but of the type. The man standing in the doorway with exhaustion carved into his face and a purpose in his posture that hadn't been there yesterday. She'd seen it before. The reluctant protector. The broken man who finds something worth protecting and doesn't know yet what it's going to cost him. "You Mercer?" "Yeah." "Rosa Bennett. Priest called me." She set a manila folder on the kitchen table, pushing aside the orange juice glass. "I pulled what I could overnight. Sarah Ashford, age 29, born in Hermann, Missouri. Worked as a nursing aide at a care facility in Owensville until about 6 weeks ago when she stopped showing up. Landlord at her apartment in Gasconade County says she left in the middle of the night. No forwarding address, no notice. Left behind furniture, dishes, clothes, took the girl and nothing else. And ended up with Pruitt," Colt said. "That's the part that doesn't make sense." Rosa opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, utility records, employment files, a driver's license photo of a woman with dark hair and tired eyes, and the kind of beauty that comes from being too exhausted to perform anything other than survival. Sarah Ashford has no connection to Dean Pruitt. Different counties, different social circles. No overlapping employment, no shared associates, no court records linking them. So how does a single mother fleeing in the middle of the night end up leaving her daughter with a violent stranger? "She didn't choose him," Colt said. "No, she didn't." Rosa tapped the folder. "Pruitt was a middleman. Someone put Lily in his care. Someone who knew where Sarah was running and got to the girl before Sarah could finish whatever she was planning." The kitchen went quiet. Hatchet stopped scraping the pan. Reno set down his catalog. Lily continued eating her eggs, unaware that the adults around her were recalibrating the shape of her catastrophe. Who? Colt asked. That's what I'm going to find out. Rosa looked at him hard. But I need you to understand something, Mercer. This isn't a rescue mission. This is an investigation. It moves slow. It moves careful. You start kicking down doors, you're going to close every door I need open. I'm not kicking down anything. Not yet, but I've seen the look on your face before, and it always ends the same way. Colt said nothing. Rosa held his gaze for 3 seconds, then nodded, satisfied with whatever she'd measured. I'm driving to Gasconade County today. Sarah's apartment. I want to see what she left behind. She looked at Lily. The girl stays here? The girl stays with me. Then you stay here, both of you. Rosa picked up her folder and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. Priest tells me you're a good man, Mercer. I don't care about good. I care about steady. You steady? Ask me tomorrow. I'm asking you now. Then yeah, I'm steady. She left. Her truck coughed to life in the driveway and pulled away, trailing exhaust that hung in the cold air like a question nobody had answered. Colt spent the morning with Lily, not doing anything. That was the point. He sat on the porch while she explored the yard, picking up rocks and examining them with the forensic attention of a child who had learned to find safety in small, controllable things. She found a stick. She drew circles in the frost. She stood at the edge of the gravel lot and stared at the row of motorcycles under the awning with the expression of someone studying artifacts from a civilization she didn't understand. Which one is yours? She asked. The black one. End of the row. She walked to it. She didn't touch it. She just stood there, looking at the chrome and the leather saddlebags and the scuffed tank that bore no emblem, no name, no declaration of anything. It's big, she said. Yeah. Is it scary? Colt thought about that. It used to be. When I first learned to ride, I was scared every time I got on it. Scared I'd fall. Scared I'd go too fast. Scared I couldn't stop. Did you fall? Lots of times. Did it hurt? Every time. Then why do you keep riding? Colt looked at the bike, at the road beyond it, at the horizon that was just cloud and distance and the vague promise of somewhere else. Because falling is how you learn the road won't kill you, he said, and once you know that, you're not scared anymore. Lily considered this with the gravity of a 5-year-old philosopher. Then she reached out and touched the handlebar with one finger. Just one. Lightly. Like she was testing whether the world would allow it. It did. Patricia Holm arrived at 2 p.m. for her welfare check. She walked through the clubhouse with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she was cataloging violations the way a naturalist catalogs species, with clinical detachment and quiet alarm. She checked the room. She checked the kitchen. She checked the bathroom. She interviewed Lily alone for 11 minutes while Colt waited downstairs with his hands in his pockets and his pulse doing things he'd only felt under fire. She's calm, Patricia said when she came down. Calmer than she should be, honestly. She talks about you. What does she say? That you stayed. Patricia made a note on her clipboard. Mr. Mercer, I'm going to be blunt with you. This arrangement is irregular. It's temporary. And there are people above me who are uncomfortable with a child being placed in a motorcycle club. It's not a placement. It's me. To the county, it's the same thing. You're associated with these men. You live in their property. That carries weight. These men are veterans. Every one of them. They served this country, and the country gave them back with broken parts and no instructions. They built something here. It's not a gang. It's not a front. It's a family that the military forgot to provide. Patricia looked at him for a long time. 48 hours is almost up. I found a foster placement in Callaway County. A couple. Retired teachers. Good record. Stable home. They can take Lily tomorrow morning. The words hit Colt's chest like something solid. He'd known this was coming. He'd known the 48 hours was a fence, not a field. But knowing and feeling were different countries, and the border between them had just been erased. Does Lily know? I'll tell her this afternoon. Don't. Patricia's eyebrows rose. Let me tell her, Colt said. She trusts me. If it comes from you, it's the system. If it comes from me, it's what, Mr. Mercer? He couldn't finish the sentence. Because what he wanted to say was, it's a person who chose to stay telling her that staying has a limit. and that sentence contained more honesty than he was ready to put into the air between them. "Just let me tell her," he said. Patricia studied him. Then she nodded once. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. She walked to the door. "And Mr. Mercer? The couple in Callaway County are good people. This isn't a punishment." She left. Colt stood in the kitchen and listened to her sedan pull away and tried to remember how to breathe like a man who hadn't just been told he was losing something he'd only had for 36 hours. The Iron Veil held church that night, not in a building, in the metal shop out back where they always held it, around a workbench that served as their table, on stools and crates, and a single folding chair that Hatchet had won in a poker game in 2019 and refused to relinquish. Priest sat at the head, Reno to his right, Hatchet to his left. 5 other members filled the rest. Digger, a former infantry sergeant with a prosthetic leg below the left knee. Moth, a thin, quiet man who'd done 2 tours as an army translator and who spoke 4 languages and trusted none of them. Webb, who ran the club's legal motorcycle repair business and kept the books with the same precision he'd used to calibrate artillery trajectories in the Gulf. Coyote, the youngest at 33, a Marine veteran who smiled too easily and drank too much and was 2 years sober and still white-knuckling it some nights. And Boone. Boone sat at the far end of the bench with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the particular stillness of a man who had arrived with a position and was not going to leave without defending it. He was 46, former Special Forces. A scar that ran from his right ear to his chin, earned in a place he still couldn't talk about without the room going cold. He'd been with the Iron Veil since the beginning, one of the founding members, Priest's oldest friend, the man who had written the club's bylaws with the same surgical precision he'd applied to mission planning in another life. Boone was not a cruel man. He was not a selfish man. He was a man who had survived by building walls, and he defended those walls with the fervor of someone who knew what happened when they fell. Priest opened with the facts. He laid it out the way he laid everything out, flat, complete, without editorial. The girl, the situation, Colt's decision, the 48-hour window, the CPS worker, the foster placement. Then he stopped talking and let the silence work. Boone broke it. "So we're a halfway house now. We're doing what we've always done," Priest said. "What we've always done is ride. What we've always done is look out for each other. For us. Not for every stray that wanders into a gas station." The word stray landed in the room like a dropped wrench. Colt's hands went flat on the workbench. Reno shifted in his seat. Priest's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes tightened. The quiet recalibration of a leader who had heard a line get crossed and was deciding whether to address it now or let it breathe. "She's not a stray," Colt said. "She's not ours either." Boone leaned forward. "Colt, I'm not saying you did wrong. You did what any of us would have done in that gas station, but the gas station was the gas station. This is the clubhouse. This is where we live, where we plan, where we operate. You brought a 5-year-old child and a CPS investigation into our home. You understand what that means? I understand what leaving her meant. Nobody's saying leave her. We're saying let the system left her with Dean Pruitt." Silence. The kind that has edges. Boone looked around the table. "Anyone else want to say something? Or am I the only one who remembers that we've spent 4 years building something here? We've got a legal business. We've got standing in this community. We've got men at this table who can't afford a spotlight, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because the world doesn't give bikers the benefit of the doubt. One phone call from CPS, one bad report, one neighbor who sees a little girl in a building full of bikers and calls the county. That's all it takes." "She's leaving tomorrow," Colt said. The words came out like broken glass. "Foster placement in Callaway County, 9 a.m. The table shifted. Reno looked at Colt. Moth looked at his hands. Coyote stared at the ceiling. "Good," Boone said. Then, softer, "I'm sorry, Colt, but good." "And the mother?" Priest asked. "Rosa's looking into it." "Rosa Bennett?" Boone's eyes narrowed. "Since when do we hire private investigators?" "She's not hired. She's a favor." "A favor from who?" "From me," Priest said. The words carried the quiet finality of a vault door closing. Boone looked at the president, and the president looked back. And in that look was an entire history. The trust built through decades, the disagreements survived, the mutual recognition that leadership sometimes meant holding ground that nobody else could see the reason for holding. "This isn't club business," Boone said. "It is now." Another silence. Longer this time. The shop smelled like motor oil and cold metal, and the particular brand of tension that builds when men who love each other disagree about what love requires them to do. "I'm calling a vote," Boone said. Priest nodded. "On what?" "On whether the club provides resources, time, manpower, money, to search for a woman none of us have ever met, on behalf of a child who will be in foster care by tomorrow morning." Colt started to speak. Priest raised one finger. Colt closed his mouth. "Vote," Priest said. It went around the table. "Digger, yes. Moth, yes. Webb, abstain, then yes. Coyote, yes." With a look at Colt that carried something raw and personal that nobody asked about, Hatchet said nothing but held up one finger, which was Hatchet's version of a standing ovation. "Reno? Yes. Boone? No. 6-1. The motion carried. Boone stood up. He didn't slam anything. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood, put on his jacket, and looked at Colt the way a man looks at a brother who has just made a decision that will cost both of them. "I hope you find her," Boone said, "and I hope it's worth what it's going to cost this club." He walked out, his boots on the gravel, his Harley catching on the third kick, the engine roaring into the dark and fading down the road until the silence came back and filled the space where he'd been. Colt sat at the workbench with his head down. The vote had gone his way. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like the first crack in something he'd spent 4 years believing was unbreakable. Priest waited until the room cleared. Then he poured 2 whiskeys and set one in front of Colt. "Boone's not wrong," Priest said. "I know." "He's not right either, but he's not wrong." Priest sipped. "This club has survived because we protect what's inside the walls. Boone sees a child outside the walls, and he sees a breach. That's not cruelty. That's a man who lost everything once and built something new and can't stand the thought of losing it again." "What did he lose?" Priest was quiet for a long time. The whiskey caught the light from the single bulb above the workbench, turning amber and slow. "His daughter," Priest said. "Before the club. Before any of this. She was 7. Car accident. His wife was driving. The wife survived. The marriage didn't." He drank. Boone doesn't talk about it because talking about it means admitting it happened. And admitting it happened means feeling it, and feeling it is the one mission he can't complete. Colt stared at his whiskey. He didn't drink it. He just stared at it, watching the light move through it, thinking about Boone walking out of the shop with a dead daughter in his chest, and a vote he'd lost because the men around him had chosen a living girl over a ghost. "Go upstairs," Priest said. "Check on the kid. Get some rest. Rosa will call in the morning." "I have to tell Lily about the foster placement." "I know. I don't know how." Priest looked at him with eyes that had buried friends in 3 different countries and still managed to stay open. "You tell her the truth. You tell her you're not disappearing, and then you make damn sure you mean it." Colt went upstairs. He opened the door to Lily's room. The cot was empty. His heart stopped. Actually stopped. A full beat of nothing. A gap in the rhythm of being alive that lasted long enough for every worst-case scenario to flood through him like black water. He scanned the room. The blanket was on the floor. The rabbit was on the pillow. The backpack was... He heard it. Breathing. Small, steady, rhythmic. Coming from the closet. He opened the closet door slowly. She was inside, curled on the floor between a box of old motorcycle magazines and a pair of boots that belonged to nobody. She'd wrapped herself in a jacket she'd found on a hook. Reno's spare, too big for her by a factor of 5, the sleeves puddled around her like collapsed tunnels. She was asleep. Her face was calm. Her hand was wrapped around the photograph, the one from the backpack, the woman with dark hair, the 4 words on the back. She'd gone to the closet because the closet was small, because small spaces were spaces where no one could reach her without warning. Because a 5-year-old girl who had been hurt by large people in large rooms had learned that safety was a function of square footage, and the smaller the space, the harder it was for pain to find you. Colt knelt on the floor outside the closet. He didn't reach in. He didn't pick her up. He just knelt there, his knees on old hardwood, his hands on his thighs, watching her sleep inside a dead man's boots and a combat medic's jacket. And he made a decision that had nothing to do with votes or timelines or the system or the law. He was not sending her to Callaway County. He didn't know how. He didn't know what it would cost. He didn't know if Priest would support it, or if Boone would leave, or if Patricia Holm would bury him in the paperwork she'd promised. He didn't know any of that. He only knew that this girl had walked through the world looking for one unlocked door, and she had found it, and he was not going to close it. His phone buzzed. Rosa Bennett. He answered in the hallway, keeping his voice low. Mercer. I'm at the apartment in Gasconade County. And? Rosa's voice had changed. The professional calm was still there, but underneath it was something tighter, the controlled urgency of a woman who had found something she wasn't expecting. Sarah Ashford didn't just leave. She planned it. I found a rented storage unit about 6 miles from here, paid up through October. Inside it, suitcases, documents, a new prepaid phone still in the box, cash, $2,000 in a coffee can, children's clothes in Lily's size, tags still on, school enrollment papers for a district in Kansas. She was building an escape, a complete one. New start, new state, everything a mother needs to disappear with her child and begin again. Rosa paused. But she never made it to the storage unit. The cash is still there, the phone is still sealed. Whatever happened to Sarah Ashford happened between leaving the apartment and reaching that unit. Somewhere in those 6 miles, someone stopped her. Colt leaned against the wall. The hallway was dark. Behind the closed door, Lily slept in a closet, holding a photograph of a mother who had built a door to freedom and never walked through it. There's one more thing, Rosa said. Her voice dropped. I pulled the lease on the storage unit. It was co-signed. Someone helped Sarah rent it. Someone with resources, someone local, someone who knew what she was running from. Who? The co-signer's name is Garrett Ashford. The name hit Colt like a fist he didn't see coming. Ashford, same last name. Sarah's brother-in-law, her dead husband's older brother. Rosa's breathing was steady, controlled, the breathing of a woman assembling a picture she didn't want to look at. Garrett Ashford lives in Crawford County, runs a property management company, owns about a dozen rental houses scattered across 3 counties. He helped Sarah plan the escape. He co-signed the storage unit. He paid for the prepaid phone. So he's an ally. The silence on the other end lasted too long. Rosa. Dean Pruitt, Rosa said, the man who had Lily. I ran his background deeper tonight. He has no permanent address, no steady employment. But for the last 8 months, he's been living rent-free in a house in Marys County. Let me guess. A property owned by Garrett Ashford. The hallway tilted. Not physically. The floor stayed level. The walls stayed vertical. But something in the architecture of the story shifted, and Colt felt it the way you feel an earthquake before the shaking starts, in the bones, in the silence that precedes the breaking. The man who helped Sarah plan her escape was the same man who housed the person holding her daughter. Mercer, Rosa said, I don't know what Garrett Ashford is. He could be a man who tried to help and failed. He could be a man who pretended to help and betrayed her. But right now, he's the only person alive who knows what happened to Sarah in those 6 miles. And I'm driving to Crawford County in the morning to find out which one he is. Colt closed his eyes. Behind the door, Lily breathed, in the closet, in the dark, holding a photograph of a woman who had trusted the wrong person or the right person at the wrong time. And either way, the result was the same. A mother gone, a child broken, and a trail that led not to a stranger, but to family. I'm coming with you, Colt said. No, you're staying with the girl. Rosa, you're staying with the girl, Mercer, because if Garrett Ashford is what I think he might be, then whoever took Sarah knows about Lily. And if they know about Lily, they know she's with you. And if they know she's with you, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Colt pressed his back against the wall and listened to the silence on the line and the silence in the hallway and the silence from behind the door, where a child slept in a closet with a dead man's boots and a promise written in a mother's shaking hand. And he understood, with the clarity of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, that there was no going back. Not from the girl, not from the search, not from whatever was waiting in Crawford County behind the door of a man named Garrett Ashford, who had signed his name on a storage unit full of hope and a lease for a monster. Downstairs, the front door opened, boots on the porch, the click of a lighter, the smell of cigarette smoke rising through the old farmhouse like a ghost looking for a body. Priest's voice, low, from the kitchen. "He's still up there?" Reno's voice. "Yeah." "He's not going to let her go tomorrow, is he?" Silence. "No," Reno said. "He's not." Priest exhaled. The sound was old and heavy and full of the particular weariness of a man who had watched enough wars begin to recognize the sound of the first shot. "Then we better be ready," he said, "because tomorrow this stops being a favor and starts being a fight." Outside, the wind picked up. The frost deepened. The row of Harleys sat silent under the corrugated awning, chrome going white with cold, engines ticking as they cooled in the dark. And 300 miles south, in a house that belonged to a man named Garrett Ashford, a locked door opened. Footsteps crossed a hallway. A woman pressed herself against the far wall of a room with no windows and held her breath and listened to the knob turning, and she knew, the way prey knows, the way mothers know, the way anyone who has ever been trapped inside someone else's mercy knows. That time was running out. For her. And for the daughter she'd left behind. Colt didn't call Patricia home at 9 a.m. He didn't call her at 10. He didn't call her at 11. He sat on the porch of the Ironvale clubhouse with his phone in his hand and Lily drawing circles in the frost beside him, and he watched the road the way a man watches a fuse. Knowing what was coming, not knowing when, unable to do anything about the distance between the spark and the powder. Patricia called him at 11:30. "Mr. Mercer, the Callaway County family is expecting Lily at noon. I'm 20 minutes out." "She's not going." The silence on the other end was not surprised. It was the silence of a woman who had been doing this long enough to recognize the sound of a plan falling apart before it hit the ground. "Excuse me?" "I said she's not going. Not today. Not to strangers." "Mr. Mercer, we discussed this. The 48-hour window has nothing to do with what's best for her and everything to do with what's convenient for the county. You know it. I know it. And that girl sitting 3 feet from me knows it better than both of us, because she's been passed from hand to hand her whole life, and every hand has either hurt her or let go." Patricia's breathing changed, shorter, controlled. The breathing of a bureaucrat being pushed past protocol into territory where the rules didn't have answers. "This is not a negotiation. If you refuse to release her, I will involve law enforcement." "Then involve them. But while you're filling out paperwork, I need you to hear something." Colt stood up. He walked to the edge of the porch where Lily couldn't hear. He dropped his voice to something that barely qualified as sound. "Rosa Bennett, the investigator working Sarah Ashford's disappearance, found evidence last night that Sarah was planning an escape. Storage unit, cash, new identity documents. She never made it. Someone intercepted her. And the trail leads to a man named Garrett Ashford, Sarah's brother-in-law, who also happens to be the landlord of the man who had Lily." Silence. "The same man who helped Sarah plan her escape is connected to the man who was holding her daughter. You want to tell me that's a coincidence, Patricia? You want to ship Lily off to Callaway County while her mother is locked in a room somewhere and the person responsible might know exactly where this girl is?" The silence stretched. Colt heard Patricia's pen tapping against something, a steering wheel, a clipboard, the edge of a decision she didn't want to make. "I'll give you 24 more hours," she said. "After that, I'm escalating. And Mercer, if anything happens to that child, there's no version of this where you walk away clean." "I'm not trying to walk away." She hung up. Colt put the phone in his pocket. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from the particular adrenaline that comes from telling the truth to someone who has the power to punish you for it. Lily looked up from her circles. "Who was that?" "Nobody." "You're lying." Colt looked at her. 5 years old, and she could read a lie the way other kids read picture books. Fluently, instinctively, because survival had made her bilingual in the language of adult deception. "Yeah," he said. "I am." "Is it about me?" "It's about keeping you safe." She considered this. Then she went back to her circles, and Colt sat down beside her and watched her draw shapes in the frost, and thought about how a child who had been lied to her entire life had just been lied to by the one person who'd promised not to, and he hated himself for it with a precision that felt like swallowing a blade. Rosa called at 1:15. "I'm in Crawford County, outside Garrett Ashford's property management office. Small building, downtown Steelville. His truck is here. I'm going in." "Rosa, be careful." "Careful is the only speed I have, Mercer. I'll call you when I'm out." She didn't call for 3 hours. Those 3 hours were the longest Colt had lived through since Fallujah. He paced the clubhouse. He checked windows. He cleaned his bike for no reason. He watched Lily eat lunch. A peanut butter sandwich that Reno made with the edges cut off because Reno had noticed, without being told, that Lily didn't eat the crusts. He answered 12 text messages from club members asking what was happening and gave 12 different versions of the same answer. Waiting. Hatchet sat in the corner of the kitchen sharpening a hunting knife. He hadn't said a word all day. He didn't need to. His presence was the word, the quiet, physical declaration of a man who had decided where he stood and was prepared to stand there until the ground gave way. Coyote showed up at 2 with a bag of groceries and a stuffed animal. A small brown bear with a crooked ear. He set the bear on the table in front of Lily without explanation. She looked at it. She looked at Coyote. She picked it up and held it next to the rabbit, introducing them to each other in a whisper that nobody tried to overhear. Coyote went to the porch and lit a cigarette with hands that weren't quite steady. "You good?" Colt asked. "No." Coyote exhaled. The smoke disappeared into the gray afternoon. "My sister had a kid, niece, same age as Lily. My sister's ex. He was like Pruitt. Different name, same hands. I was overseas when it was happening. By the time I got back, my niece was already in the system. Took my sister 2 years to get her out." "Did she?" "Yeah. But the kid was different. You could see it. Like someone had taken something out of her and put something else in its place. Something careful, something that flinched." Coyote tapped the ash off his cigarette. "I bought the bear because I couldn't buy back those 2 years." They stood on the porch in silence. The wind carried the smell of dead leaves and distant rain. Rosa called at 4:17. "Mercer, listen to me carefully." Her voice was different. The professional calm was gone. What replaced it was something Colt had heard only in combat, the controlled urgency of someone who has seen the shape of the enemy and is recalculating every assumption they've made since the mission began. "I'm listening." "Garrett Ashford is not what we thought. He's not a concerned brother-in-law. He's not a failed ally. He's the architect." The word landed like a round hitting armor plate. Colt gripped the porch railing. "Explain." "I went into his office presenting myself as a property insurance assessor. Standard pretense, easy to verify on the surface, hard to disprove quickly. He let me in. We talked for about 40 minutes. Normal stuff, property values, tenant histories, maintenance records. I was looking for patterns. I found them." Rosa paused. Colt heard the sound of her truck engine idling, the creak of a seat as she shifted position. Garrett Ashford owns 14 rental properties across 4 counties. 8 of them have been occupied in the last year by single women with children. Not through normal tenant applications, through referrals, from shelters, from crisis centers, from domestic violence programs. Colt's grip on the railing tightened. The wood groaned under his fingers. "He positions himself as a benefactor," Rosa continued. "Reduced rent, flexible leases. No background checks. He targets women who are running, women with children, women who have no resources, no support network, no one who's going to ask questions when things go wrong." "What goes wrong?" Rosa was quiet for 4 seconds. 4 seconds that contained an entire rewrite of the story Colt had been telling himself. The story of a missing mother and a helpful relative. The story of a simple rescue that required only finding one woman and bringing her home. I pulled county records on his properties after I left. 3 of those 8 women moved out within 6 months. No forwarding addresses, no utility transfers, just gone. And in each case, the children ended up somewhere else, with a different person, a different arrangement, always informal, always off the books. Like Pruitt. Exactly like Pruitt. Rosa's voice hardened. Garrett Ashford isn't protecting these women, Mercer. He's collecting them. He provides the shelter, earns the trust, learns their escape plans, and then he controls the exit. When they try to leave, he knows exactly where they're going because he helped them plan it. He intercepts them. The women disappear into his properties. The children get placed with people he controls, people who owe him, people who keep quiet. Colt's vision narrowed. The porch, the gravel lot, the row of bikes. Everything contracted to a single point of focus, the way the world contracts through a rifle scope when the target becomes clear. Sarah, he said. Sarah did exactly what the others did. She went to Garrett for help because he was family. He helped her plan the escape, the storage unit, the cash, the Kansas documents, but he never intended for her to use them. He was mapping her route so he could cut it off. Where is she? I don't know yet, but I know where she isn't. She's not in any hospital, any shelter, any county system in the state of Missouri. I checked. Whatever Garrett did with her, it's off the grid. Rosa paused. Mercer, there's something else. While I was in the office, I saw his phone. He got a text. I couldn't read the full message, but I saw the first line. It said, "The biker, Fulton." The air left Colt's lungs. He knows about you, Rosa said. He knows Lily is with you. He knows where you are. Colt looked through the window into the kitchen. Lily was at the table, arranging the bear and the rabbit into a scene only she understood. Reno was washing dishes. Hatchet was still in the corner, the knife in his hands catching light from the window. How long have I got? I don't know. He didn't seem alarmed during our conversation, which means either he's confident or he's careful. But Mercer, a man who runs an operation like this doesn't leave loose ends. Lily is a loose end, you're a loose end, and he has people. Pruitt was one. There will be others. What do you need? Time. I need to pull records on the other women. I need to find a pattern, a property, a location, somewhere he keeps them. If Sarah is alive, she's in one of his holdings. But he owns properties across 4 counties under 3 different LLCs. It's going to take me at least 48 hours to map it all. We might not have 48 hours. Then you better make sure that clubhouse is locked down tight. Rosa's voice softened, not with sentiment, but with the weight of experience. Mercer, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen men like Garrett Ashford before. They don't operate on anger. They operate on control. He won't come at you loud. He'll come at you through the system. A phone call to CPS, a complaint to the county, a legal maneuver that forces you to hand the girl over. And when the system takes her, she ends up right back in his network. That's not going to happen. Then you need to make sure the system doesn't have a reason to take her, which means no incidents, no confrontations, nothing that gives anyone a reason to question that girl's safety in your care. She hung up. Colt stood on the porch and felt the world tilt, not physically, but architecturally, the way a building tilts when someone removes a load-bearing wall and the whole structure begins to lean toward a collapse that hasn't happened yet but is now inevitable. He called Priest. Kitchen, now. Priest was there in 2 minutes. Reno in 3. Hatchet never left. Coyote came in from the porch. Moth arrived 15 minutes later on a bike that sounded like it needed work. Digger pulled up behind him. Webb called in. He was at the shop, 40 minutes out, but listening. Colt told them everything Rosa had said. The room changed. Not in volume. Nobody shouted, nobody cursed, nobody threw anything. It changed in density. The air got heavier. The men got stiller. The particular quiet of veterans processing a threat assessment filled the kitchen like something you could touch. How many properties? Priest asked. 14 that Rosa found. Could be more under different names. And the women? At least 3 unaccounted for, could be more. Priest looked at Reno. Reno looked at Moth. Moth looked at his hands, the hands that had translated interrogations in Kandahar, that had learned to read the difference between a lie and a truth in 17 different dialects. that were now resting flat on a kitchen table in Missouri, while the shape of something monstrous assembled itself from paperwork and silence. "This isn't about one girl anymore," Moth said. It was the most words he'd spoken in a week. "No," Colt said. "It's not." "Then we need Boone." The sentence landed like a grenade pin hitting the floor. Every man in the room knew what it meant. Not just the practical reality of needing Boone's tactical mind, but the emotional cost of going to a man who had voted no and asking him to come back to a fight that had just grown larger than anyone had anticipated. "I'll talk to Boone," Priest said. "He won't like it." "He doesn't have to like it. He has to hear it." Priest stood up. "Reno, pull up every public record you can find on Garrett Ashford's LLCs. Property deeds, corporate filings, anything with an address attached. Moth, I want eyes on the road. Anyone comes down that gravel drive who isn't one of us, I want to know before they reach the gate. Hatchet." Hatchet held up the knife. It caught the overhead light and threw a line of silver across the ceiling. "Yeah," Priest said. "That." Colt went upstairs. He found Lily in the closet again. Not sleeping this time, just sitting, the photograph in her lap, the bear and the rabbit on either side of her like sentries. He sat on the floor outside the closet door, close enough to be present, far enough to let her own the space. "Lily," she looked up. "Do you remember a man named Garrett?" The change was instantaneous. Her body went rigid. Not the flinch of a child surprised, but the full-body lock of a creature that has heard the footsteps of its predator. Her fingers closed around the photograph. Her eyes went flat. The color left her face in a wave that started at her hairline and rolled downward like a shade being drawn. "Lily, you're safe. Nobody is coming in here. I just need to know... Do you know who Garrett is?" "Uncle Garrett." The words came out like something being extracted, pulled from a place inside her where they'd been buried under layers of silence and fear and the child's intuitive understanding that some names are dangerous to say out loud. "Did Uncle Garrett come to your house?" A nod, small, mechanical. "Before your mom went away?" Another nod. "Did he and your mom talk?" "They fought." Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mommy was packing bags. Uncle Garrett said she couldn't leave. Mommy said she could. Uncle Garrett said..." She stopped. Her fingers tightened on the photograph until the edges bent. "What did Uncle Garrett say?" "He said nobody leaves without him knowing." Lily looked at Colt with eyes that were decades older than the face they lived in. "Then Mommy was gone. And then the other man came. The man with the bad breath. And he put me in his car. And he said Uncle Garrett wanted me to be good." Colt's hands were shaking again, not from adrenaline this time, from something deeper. The tectonic shift of a man who has spent his life believing that the worst things happen in war zones and is now sitting on the floor of a farmhouse in Missouri, learning that the worst things happen in living rooms, in whispered conversations, in the space between a mother's packed bags and a brother-in-law's smile. "Lily, listen to me. Uncle Garrett is never going to touch you again. Nobody who works for him is going to touch you again. Do you understand?" She studied him, reading him the way she read everyone. Not the words, but the architecture beneath them, the load-bearing truth or the hollow performance. "Promise?" she said. "Promise." She held up her hand. Not for a handshake, for a pinky. The smallest finger on the smallest hand extended toward a man who had promised 100 things in his life and broken most of them. He linked his pinky with hers. It was ridiculous. It was the most serious oath he'd ever taken. Priest found Boone at a bar in Kingdom City. Not drinking, just sitting, watching a basketball game on a television he wasn't actually seeing. He was working through his second cup of coffee with the slow deliberation of a man who had quit liquor 3 years ago and still missed it the way amputees miss limbs. Priest sat down beside him, ordered coffee, didn't speak for 2 full minutes. "You're going to tell me something I don't want to hear," Boone said. "Yeah." "And it's going to change the scope of this whole thing." "Yeah." "And you need me." Priest drank his coffee. "I need the man who planned extraction routes in places where getting it wrong meant body bags. I need the man who can look at a map and see what everyone else misses. I need my brother." Boone stared at the television. On screen, a player missed a free throw. The crowd made a sound that had nothing to do with anything that mattered. "Tell me," Boone said. Priest told him. All of it. Garrett Ashford, the properties, the women, the children, the text on the phone, the machine. Boone listened without moving. His coffee went cold. His jaw worked. The slow, grinding rotation of a man chewing on something that wasn't food. When Priest finished, Boone was quiet for a long time. "How many kids?" he asked. His voice was different now. The opposition was gone. What replaced it was something colder, something that had been forged in places where the stakes were measured in lives, and the margin for error was zero. "We don't know yet, at least Lily, possibly more." "And you think Sarah Ashford is alive?" "Rosa thinks so. Somewhere in his properties, controlled, isolated." Boone set down his coffee cup with the careful precision of a man placing a detonator. "When I was overseas," he said, "we found a compound outside Mazar-e Sharif. 16 women, locked rooms. A man who called himself a benefactor. The locals called him a protector." Boone's eyes went hard and distant. "We called him a target." "This isn't overseas." "No, it's worse. Because overseas we had authority. Here we have a motorcycle club and a retired detective and a CPS system that this man has already figured out how to manipulate." Boone looked at Priest. "You know what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about a bar fight. We're not talking about running off a local bully. We're talking about going to war with a man who has the legal system in his pocket, who has operated for years without being caught, and who knows we're coming." "Yes. And you're asking me to plan it." "I'm asking you to come home and do what you were built to do." Boone stood up. He left money on the bar. He walked outside into the parking lot where his Harley sat under a streetlight that buzzed with the desperate energy of a bulb that was about to die. "I'm not doing this for you," he said, "and I'm not doing it for Mercer. I know. I'm doing it for a girl who looked like mine." Priest said nothing. There was nothing to say. Some wounds don't heal, they just find a purpose. They rode back to Fulton together. 2 bikes on a highway that cut through Missouri like a scar. Engines loud enough to drown out the things that men carry, but never speak. The cold air hitting their faces like a reminder that being alive sometimes feels like punishment and sometimes feels like a second chance, and usually feels like both at the same time. The clubhouse was lit up when they arrived. Every man was there. Reno had spread maps across the kitchen table, county lines, property records, highlighted addresses. Moth had positioned himself at the front window with a pair of binoculars and the patient stillness of a man who had once spent 42 hours watching a single doorway in Helmand Province. Boone walked in. The room shifted, not with relief, with recognition. The man who had walked out in protest had walked back in for war, and every veteran in that room knew what that transition cost because they'd all made it at least once. He went to the table. He looked at the maps. He looked at the addresses. He looked at Reno. How many properties confirmed? 14 under Ashford's primary LLC. Rosa's pulling records on 2 additional shell companies she found linked to the same registered agent. Could be more. Distances? Scattered. Closest is 12 miles out in Callaway County. Farthest is near the Lake of the Ozarks, about 90 minutes south. That's too many. He won't keep her close to his office. Too risky. He won't keep her at the farthest point. Too inconvenient to monitor. Look for the middle ring. 40 to 60 minutes out. Rural. Low traffic. Properties that don't have regular tenant turnover. Reno started marking. Boone leaned over the map with the focus of a man reading terrain for ambush points. And for a moment the kitchen in the converted farmhouse in Fulton, Missouri looked exactly like a forward operating base. Maps spread, positions marked, men leaning in with the quiet intensity of people preparing to enter a space where the outcome is uncertain and the cost of failure is absolute. Colt came downstairs. He saw Boone. Boone saw him. Neither man spoke. They didn't need to. The argument from church was still in the room. It would always be in the room. But it had been overwritten by something larger, the way a campfire gets overwritten by a forest fire, the way a personal grievance gets overwritten by a shared enemy. Boone nodded once. Colt nodded back. That was the whole reconciliation. It was enough. Then Colt's phone rang. Not Rosa, not Patricia. A number he didn't recognize. He answered, "Mr. Mercer?" The voice was male, calm, educated, the kind of voice that had learned to sound reasonable the way some men learn to use tools as a means of controlling outcomes. "My name is Garrett Ashford. I believe you have my niece." The kitchen went silent. Colt hit the speaker button and set the phone on the table. Every man in the room stopped moving. "I don't have your niece," Colt said. "I have a girl who was being beaten by a man you put her with." Dean Pruitt was a temporary arrangement, an unfortunate one. I take full responsibility for that decision, and I'm grateful, truly grateful, that you intervened. The voice was warm, concerned, perfectly calibrated. "But Lily is my family, Mr. Mercer. My brother's daughter. I've been looking for her since I learned about the situation with Dean. I'd like to come pick her up." Colt looked at Priest. Priest shook his head slowly. Not a refusal, a warning. "Keep him talking." "Where's Sarah?" Colt asked. A pause. One beat too long for a man with nothing to hide. "Sarah is struggling. She's had mental health challenges for some time. After my brother passed, she became increasingly unstable. She left Lily with Dean because she couldn't care for the child. I've been trying to locate Sarah as well, to get her the help she needs." Every man in the room heard it, the rehearsed quality, the smooth articulation of a story that had been assembled like furniture, all the joints glued tight, nothing that squeaked when you pushed on it. But Rosa's evidence was the screwdriver that had already found the seams. "That's not what the records show," Colt said. Another pause. Longer. "What records?" "The storage unit in Gasconade County, the one you co-signed, full of clothes, cash, documents, everything a mother needs to disappear with her child. You helped Sarah plan an escape, Garrett. Then you made sure she never made it." The warmth left the voice. What replaced it was not anger. It was the flat, recalibrated tone of a man who has been reading from one script and is now switching to another. "You're making assumptions based on incomplete information, Mr. Mercer. And you're making a very serious mistake by keeping a child from her legal family. I'm going to give you one opportunity to correct this before I involve the authorities." "The authorities are already involved. CPS has the case. The police have Pruitt. And a very good investigator has your name attached to things that don't look good under daylight." Silence. The phone hummed with the low static of a connection that was carrying more weight than the signal could bear. "Who are you, Mr. Mercer?" Garrett's voice had gone quiet. Not soft. Quiet the way a blade is quiet before it cuts. "You're a veteran with PTSD and a motorcycle club. You have no legal standing, no custody, no authority. You're a stranger who picked up a child at a gas station and is now playing hero in a story that's bigger than you understand." "Then help me understand. Where is Sarah?" "Goodbye, Mr. Mercer. You'll be hearing from my attorney and from the county." The line went dead. The kitchen stayed silent for 5 seconds. Then Boone spoke. "He's going to move her tonight." Everyone looked at him. "He knows we're looking. He knows Rosa is pulling records. He knows the clock is running. A man like this, controlled, systematic, patient, he has contingencies. The moment he feels the net closing, he moves his assets. Sarah Ashford is an asset. If she's in one of his properties, she won't be there by morning." "Then we find her before morning," Colt said. "With what? We don't know which property. We don't know who else he has working for him. We don't know the layout, the security, the access points. You want to ride 90 bikes across 4 counties, kicking down doors? That's not a rescue. That's a raid. And raids without intelligence get people killed." Boone pointed at the map. "We need Rosa's intel. We need the property narrowed down, and we need it in the next 6 hours." Colt called Rosa. She answered on the first ring. "I heard," she said. "I've been listening to the county property transfer records for the last 2 hours. I've narrowed it to 3 properties in the middle ring, all rural, all isolated, all with utility connections that show low but consistent electrical usage despite being listed as vacant. 3 is still too many. I know, but one of them, a farmhouse on County Road 417 outside of Bell, has something the others don't. A recent delivery from a medical supply company, signed for by a woman named Karen Pruitt. Dean Pruitt's sister. She's a licensed practical nurse. Lost her license 2 years ago for, are you ready for this? Unauthorized confinement of a patient at an assisted living facility. The room absorbed this like a body absorbs impact. A moment of blankness followed by the spreading ache of comprehension. A nurse who had lost her license for locking up a patient, working for a man who locked up women, receiving medical supplies at a farmhouse that was supposed to be empty. That's our property, Boone said. County Road 417, Rosa confirmed. Bell, Missouri, about 55 minutes south. I'm heading there now, but I'm not going in alone and I'm not going in loud. If Sarah's there and we spook them, they move her and we lose her, possibly for good. We'll meet you, Colt said. Mercer. Who stays with Lily? The question hit him like a wall. He looked at the maps. He looked at the men around the table. He looked at the ceiling, above which a 5-year-old girl slept in a closet with a photograph and a promise. I'll stay, Reno said. Colt turned to him. Reno stood by the sink with his arms crossed, his surgical scar catching the kitchen light, his eyes steady with the calm of a man who had spent his career keeping people alive and was not going to stop now because the operating theater had changed. She trusts you, Reno said to Colt. But she's not afraid of me, and I'm the one who cuts the crust off her sandwiches. Go find her mother. I'll keep her safe. Colt looked at Reno for a long time. The weight of what he was being asked to do pressed against the weight of what he was being asked to leave behind, and both weights were unbearable, and the only thing that kept him standing was the knowledge that Lily's photograph had 4 words on the back, and the woman who wrote them was running out of time. If anything happens, nothing is going to happen to that girl while I'm breathing, Reno said, and I plan on breathing for a long time. Go. Colt went upstairs. He opened the closet door. Lily was awake, the photograph in her hands, the bear and the rabbit flanking her like guards. I have to go somewhere, he said. Her eyes went wide. The grip on the photograph tightened. I'm coming back. Do you hear me? I'm coming back. Reno is going to stay with you. He's going to be right here. Where are you going? Colt knelt down. He looked at her face, the face that had learned to read lies before it learned to read letters, the face that had been let down so many times that hope had become a language she no longer spoke fluently. I'm going to find your mom. The words hit the air, and Lily's face did something that broke every remaining wall inside Colt Mercer's chest. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the photograph, the water-stained, creased, handled-to-softness photograph of the dark-haired woman with the unknowing smile. And she held it out to him. So you know what she looks like, Lily said. He took it. He put it in the inside pocket of his vest against his chest, where the leather and the paper and the scar tissue all pressed together into something that felt like a heartbeat made of promises. He stood. He walked downstairs. He walked past Priest and Boone and Hatchet and Coyote and Moth and Digger, and every man he passed looked at him and saw the same thing. A man who was no longer deciding, who had crossed the line between intention and action, who is now moving with the terrible, beautiful momentum of someone who has found the one thing worth losing everything for. The bike started in the gravel lot, 5 engines. The sound hit the cold air and scattered across the Missouri darkness like thunder with a purpose. Colt on the Heritage Softail, Priest on his Road King, Boone on a blacked-out street glide that he rode the way he did everything, with precision and without apology. Hatchet on a Dyna that sounded like an argument with the road. Coyote on a Sportster that he'd rebuilt himself during the worst year of his sobriety because his hands needed something to do that wasn't reaching for a bottle. They pulled onto the highway, 5 headlights cutting south through the dark. The road was empty. The sky was empty. The world was reduced to engines and asphalt, and the yellow center line unspooling beneath them like a thread being pulled from the fabric of everything that had been normal 24 hours ago. County Road 417 was 55 minutes away. Sarah Ashford was somewhere at the end of it, alive or not, reachable or not, savable or not. And behind them, in a clubhouse on the outskirts of Fulton, a 5-year-old girl sat in a closet with a combat medic standing guard outside the door and whispered to a stuffed rabbit and a 1-eared bear that the tall man was coming back. He promised. And this time the promise was going to be real, because she had given him the photograph, and the photograph was the most powerful thing she owned, and nobody carries something that powerful unless they intend to return it. County Road 417 was not a road. It was an afterthought, a strip of cracked asphalt that branched off the state highway and disappeared into timber and darkness like something the county had started building and then forgotten about. The way counties forget about things that don't generate tax revenue or voter turnout. No streetlights, no signs, no houses for the first 2 miles, just trees pressing in from both sides, their bare branches reaching across the road like fingers trying to close a wound. They killed the headlights at the turnoff. Priest's call. He pulled to the shoulder a 1/4 mile before the junction and cut his engine, and the others followed. 5 bikes going silent in sequence, the sudden absence of sound so total it felt like pressure against the eardrums. The night rushed in to fill the space. Wind through dead branches. The distant mechanical hum of a power line somewhere in the trees. The tick of cooling engines. Boone was off his bike first. He pulled a county map from his saddlebag. Paper, not digital, because screens glow and glow carries in the dark, and spread it across his tank. He clicked on a pen light and held it low, the red-filtered beam barely touching the surface. "Property sits about 1.5 miles in," he said. His voice dropped to a register that didn't carry past the circle of men around him. County records show a farmhouse, a detached garage, and an outbuilding, probably a barn or storage structure. Driveway runs northeast off 417 for about 1/4 mile. Open ground on 3 sides, tree line on the south. "Approaches?" Priest asked. "Driveway's the only vehicle access, but there's a utility easement that runs along the south tree line. Maintenance path for the power company. Overgrown, but passable, on foot." "How do you know it's passable?" "Because I drove past the entrance on my way to the bar yesterday and I looked." Boone folded the map. "I told you, I wasn't done thinking about this. I just wasn't ready to admit it." Rosa's truck was parked 50 yards ahead, tucked behind a stand of cedars that blocked it from the road. She was leaning against the hood when they walked up. No flashlight, no phone screen, just a small woman in a flannel shirt standing in the dark with the patience of someone who had spent 3 decades waiting for suspects to make mistakes. "Took you long enough?" she said. "We were being careful," Priest said. "Careful is good, but we've got a problem." She pointed south, into the darkness. "I've been here 40 minutes. 10 minutes after I arrived, a vehicle came down 417 from the opposite direction. White panel van, no markings. It turned into the driveway and didn't come back out." "Someone's moving her," Colt said. "That's what I'm afraid of. If Garrett got spooked by your phone call, he's accelerating his timeline. Whatever's in that farmhouse, he wants it gone before morning." Boone processed this the way he processed everything. In silence, with the rapid, invisible calculation of a man whose brain had been trained to turn chaos into geometry. How many people are we looking at? The van driver, at minimum. Karen Pruitt, if she's still there. Possibly Garrett himself. Rosa paused. And possibly someone else. When I was pulling records on the property, I found a second utility account. Separate meter, separate billing, addressed to the outbuilding. That means the outbuilding has its own electrical service. You don't wire a barn for its own power unless you're using it for something that draws current. Like what? Like keeping people alive in a space that needs heat, light, and monitoring. The circle of men went quiet. The wind moved through the cedars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called once. A single, broken note that sounded like a question nobody wanted to answer. "Rules," Priest said. The word carried the weight of command. Not the command of a man who demanded obedience, but the command of a man who had learned that rules were the difference between a mission and a massacre. "We are not law enforcement. We do not have badges. We do not have warrants. We do not have legal authority to enter that property." "Then what are we doing here?" Coyote asked. "We're going to look. We're going to verify. And if Sarah Ashford is in that building, we're going to call every law enforcement agency within 100 miles and stand between that door and anyone who tries to move her before they arrive." Priest looked at each man in turn. Nobody throws a punch unless they're defending themselves or someone who can't defend themselves. Nobody carries a weapon past the tree line, and nobody does anything that gives Garrett Ashford's attorney a single frame of footage or a single witness statement that makes us the criminals in this story. Are we clear? Nods. Silence. The agreement of men who understood that restraint was not weakness, but the most dangerous form of strength. The kind that required you to hold the full weight of your rage in your hands and choose, with every breath, not to let it fall. They moved on foot. Boone led. The utility easement was exactly where the map said it would be. A narrow, overgrown path that paralleled the south tree line, choked with dead grass and frozen mud that cracked under their boots like thin glass. They walked single file. No lights, no conversation. The only sound was breathing and footfall and the distant, rhythmic pulse of a generator that grew louder as they approached. The farmhouse appeared through the trees like a bruise on the landscape. A two-story structure with a sagging porch, dark windows, and the particular stillness of a building that was pretending to be empty. The detached garage sat 30 yards to the east, its door closed, a thin line of light visible beneath the roll-up panel. And beyond the garage, set back against the far tree line, the outbuilding. It was newer than the farmhouse. Concrete block walls, a metal roof, one door, steel, windowless, illuminated by a single exterior light that cast a cone of yellow across the frozen ground. And from inside, barely audible over the generator's hum, the sound of a television playing to an audience that hadn't chosen the channel. The white panel van was parked between the farmhouse and the outbuilding. Its engine was off, but the hood radiated heat into the cold air. It hadn't been there long. Boone raised a fist. Everyone stopped. He pointed, 2 fingers toward the farmhouse, 1 finger toward the outbuilding. He held up an open palm. Wait. They waited. 3 minutes. 5. The cold settled into their jackets and their bones and the spaces between their thoughts. Colt's eyes stayed on the outbuilding door. Behind that door, maybe, was the woman in the photograph. The woman with the dark hair and the unknowing smile and the 4 words written on the back in handwriting that shook. The woman whose daughter was 55 miles north, sleeping in a closet, holding a promise. The farmhouse door opened. A man stepped onto the porch. Not Garrett, too short, too heavy, with the rolling gait of someone who had spent his life doing physical work that had worn his joints but not his stubbornness. He wore a barn jacket and a ball cap and carried a flashlight that he swept across the yard in a lazy arc, checking the perimeter the way you check something you don't really expect to be wrong. Behind him, in the doorway, a woman. Short, heavy-set, wearing scrubs beneath an open coat. Karen Pruitt. She said something to the man that didn't carry across the distance. He nodded. He walked toward the outbuilding. He pulled a key ring from his jacket. He unlocked the steel door. He went inside. The door stayed open. Colt moved. Priest grabbed his arm. Not yet. The door is open. And we don't know what's inside. We don't know if there's another person. We don't know if there's a weapon. We don't know. I know she's in there. You don't know. You believe. And belief has gotten better men than you killed. Priest's grip tightened. Not hard. Firm. The grip of a man who loved the person he was restraining and was restraining him precisely because of that love. Rosa, call the county sheriff, now. Rosa was already dialing. She spoke in a low, rapid murmur. Address, situation, probable cause, urgency. She hung up and looked at Priest. 20 minutes. That's too long, Colt said. It's what we have. The man came out of the outbuilding. He was carrying something, a box, cardboard, the size of a milk crate. He set it in the back of the panel van. He went back inside. He came out again. Another box. Then a bag, a duffel, heavy, the kind that holds clothes or documents or the portable evidence of a life being dismantled for transport. They're clearing it, Boone said. His voice was flat with recognition. Everything that ties Garrett to this property, everything that proves someone was held here, they're loading it into the van. By the time the sheriff arrives, the building will be empty and clean, and there won't be a shred of evidence that anyone was ever inside. Where's the woman? Moth asked. He'd been watching with the stillness of a man who had learned to observe before he spoke and speak only when observation wasn't enough. He's moving boxes. He's moving bags. But he hasn't moved a person. They watched. The man made 4 more trips. Each time he emerged from the outbuilding with something, a folding table, a plastic bin, a rolled-up mattress that he shoved into the van with the efficient indifference of a man who had done this before. Karen Pruitt stayed on the farmhouse porch, watching, her arms crossed, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. Then the man went inside and didn't come back out. 1 minute, 2, 3. From inside the outbuilding, a sound, not loud, muffled by the concrete walls and the distance and the generator's hum, but unmistakable to men who had spent years in places where human sounds carried through barriers of concrete and steel and silence. A voice. Female. Not screaming, arguing. The controlled, desperate volume of someone who knows that screaming won't help, but who refuses, despite everything, to be silent. Colt pulled free of Priest's grip. "Mercer? She's in there. He's moving her." He was already walking. Not running, walking with the measured, purposeful stride of a man who had crossed no man's land under fire and had learned that speed was less important than certainty. His boots hit the frozen ground. His breath came in visible bursts. His hands were at his sides, empty, open. The deliberate posture of a man who had promised not to carry violence past the tree line and was keeping that promise by force of will. Priest cursed behind him, then followed, then Boone. Then everyone. 5 men emerging from the tree line into the cone of exterior light, crossing the open ground between the trees and the outbuilding with the unhurried, implacable momentum of something that could not be stopped by anything short of an obstacle willing to accept the consequences of standing in the way. Karen Pruitt saw them first. She straightened on the porch, her mouth opening, her hand reaching for something in her coat pocket. A phone, not a weapon, but the movement carried the panic of someone whose routine had just been detonated. "Hey!" she shouted toward the outbuilding. "Hey, there's people." The man appeared in the doorway. He saw the bikers crossing the yard. His hand went to his belt, not reaching, not drawing, just the reflexive gesture of a man assessing whether the situation had escalated past the threshold of his preparedness. Colt reached the doorway first. "Step out," he said. The man looked at him. Colt was taller by 4 inches and harder by a decade of war and road and the particular calcification that happens to men who have been broken so many times that the broken pieces fuse into something denser than the original. "This is private property," the man said. "I know what it is. You're trespassing. I know what I'm doing." The man's eyes went to the bikers behind Colt. Priest, broad and silver-bearded. Boone, coiled and precise. Hatchet, silent and holding nothing but his own hands, which was somehow worse than holding a weapon. Coyote, young and wire-tight with the energy of a man whose sobriety was being tested by every molecule of adrenaline in his bloodstream. "You need to leave," the man said, but his voice had lost its authority. The math had changed. He was 1 man in a doorway facing 5 men who moved like they'd been facing doorways their entire lives. "Who's inside?" Colt asked. "Nobody. I heard a voice." "The TV." "That wasn't a TV." From behind the man, deeper inside the building, the voice again. Clearer now, without the filter of distance and concrete. A woman's voice, strained and hoarse but alive. Alive with the particular ferocity of someone who has been locked away long enough to know that silence is surrender and every sound she makes is a refusal to disappear. "Let me go. I heard someone. Please, let me." The voice cracked. Not with weakness, with the enormous, unbearable pressure of hope arriving after weeks of its absence, the sound of a person who had stopped believing that anyone was coming and had just heard boots on frozen ground and voices in the dark and the impossible, unreasonable suggestion that the world had not forgotten her. Colt looked at the man in the doorway. The man looked at Colt. And in that look was the entire calculation, the assessment of consequences, the measurement of force, the silent negotiation between a man who was following orders and a man who had stopped following anything except the voice of a woman he'd never met calling out from behind a wall that someone had built to keep her silent. "Move," Colt said. The man didn't move. Boone stepped forward. He didn't touch the man. He stood beside Colt, shoulder to shoulder, 2 combat veterans occupying a doorway with the physical authority of men whose bodies had been through things that this man's body had never imagined. "The sheriff is en route," Boone said. His voice was ice on glass. In about 15 minutes, this property is going to be full of badges and questions and the kind of attention that doesn't go away. You can be the man who stepped aside, or you can be the man who stood between law enforcement and a woman calling for help. Those are your options. There aren't others. The man's eyes flickered, the calculation completed. He stepped aside. Colt went in. The outbuilding was divided into 2 rooms. The front room was half cleared. The boxes and bags already loaded into the van had left rectangular clean spots on a dusty concrete floor. A table remained, bolted to the wall. A single chair. A television mounted in a corner, playing a cable news channel to nobody. The air smelled like bleach and recycled heat, and the particular staleness that comes from a space that has been occupied for too long by someone who is not allowed to leave. The second room was behind a door, a real door. Not steel like the exterior, but solid wood with a deadbolt that locked from the outside. The deadbolt was engaged. Colt put his hand on it. The metal was cold. He turned it. The door opened. She was against the far wall, sitting on the floor because the mattress had been taken. Her back pressed against the concrete, her knees pulled to her chest. Her hands, thin, shaking, marked with the healing cuts of someone who had tried more than once to pry open a window that had been sealed shut, wrapped around her own arms in a self-embrace that was the only embrace available. Sarah Ashford looked at Colt Mercer from the corner of a room that had been her entire world for 23 days, and she did not recognize him. She did not know his face, his name, his scars, his war, his road. She knew only that the door was open, and a man was standing in it, and the man was not Garrett, and the man was not the other one, and the man's eyes were wet, and his hands were empty, and he was looking at her the way no one had looked at her since she'd disappeared. Like she mattered. Sarah. His voice broke on the name. He didn't try to fix it. My name is Colt. I have Lily. She's safe. The sound that came out of Sarah Ashford was not a scream and not a sob and not a word. It was something older than language. The sound that mothers make when the unbearable weight of not knowing is suddenly replaced by the unbearable weight of knowing. And both weights are impossible. And the only response the body has is to release a sound that carries every hour of every day of every week she had spent in this room not knowing if her daughter was alive. She collapsed forward. Not falling, folding, the way structures fold when the force holding them upright is suddenly removed. Her hands hit the concrete. Her forehead hit the concrete. Her body shook with the seismic aftermath of a tear that had finally found its end and didn't know how to stop shaking. Colt knelt in front of her. He didn't touch her. He'd learned that from Lily. That touch is not comfort when touch has been the weapon. He knelt, close enough that she could see his face, close enough that she could hear his breathing, and he waited. She's safe, he said again. She's in a warm room with people who would die before they let anyone hurt her. She has a stuffed rabbit and a bear with a crooked ear, and she sleeps in a closet because it feels safe, and she draws circles in the frost, and she gave me this. He reached into his vest and pulled out the photograph. Water-stained, creased, handled to softness by 5-year-old fingers that had held it every night for 23 nights in a closet full of darkness and motor oil and fear. Sarah saw the photograph. Her hand reached for it, slowly, trembling. The way a hand reaches for something it's afraid will vanish on contact. She touched it. It didn't vanish. She pulled it to her chest and pressed it against her sternum and closed her eyes and made that sound again. The sound that had no name. The sound that lived in the space between annihilation and survival. The sound that mothers carry in the deepest chamber of their lungs. For the moment when they learn that the thing they love most in the world has been held by hands that were gentle instead of cruel. Can you walk? Colt asked. I haven't. Her voice was rust and gravel and weeks of disuse. My legs. I'll carry you. You don't know me. Your daughter does. That's enough. He looked at her, asking without words. She nodded. He put one arm behind her shoulders and one beneath her knees, and he stood. And she weighed nothing, and that nothing was the heaviest thing he had ever carried because it contained the entire architecture of a woman who had been disassembled by captivity and was now being lifted by a stranger in a leather vest who smelled like engine oil and cold air in the Missouri highway at night. He carried her through the first room, past the bolted door. past the television that was still talking about things that didn't matter, past the table and the chair and the clean rectangles on the dusty floor where the evidence of her imprisonment had been packed into boxes and loaded into a van. He carried her through the exterior door, into the cold, into the open, into the air that she hadn't breathed in 23 days. She gasped, not from cold, but from space. The sky above her was vast and dark, and studded with stars that she had forgotten existed because the ceiling of her room had been 7 feet high and the color of wet concrete. The bikers stood in a semicircle outside the door. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Priest stood with his hands at his sides, his silver beard catching the exterior light, his eyes bright with something that men of his age and experience rarely allowed to the surface. Boone stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his face carrying the expression of a man who was looking at something he had seen before in a different country and had spent years trying to forget. Hatchet stood like a wall. Coyote stood with tears running down his face and his fists clenched and his sobriety intact because the feeling coursing through him was something that alcohol had never been able to provide. The feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to do, for the first time since he'd come home from the war. Karen Pruitt was on the farmhouse porch, on the phone, speaking rapidly to someone whose voice Colt couldn't hear, but whose identity he could guess. "Rosa," Colt said. Rosa was already moving. She crossed the yard to the porch with the calm, unhurried stride of a woman who had spent 30 years confronting people who thought they were in control and was about to demonstrate the difference between control and the illusion of it. "Hang up the phone," Rosa said. "This is my property. You can't. This is Garrett Ashford's property. You're an unlicensed nurse living in the landlord's house, while a woman is locked in a building 50 yards away. The sheriff is 8 minutes out. You can spend those 8 minutes on the phone with the man who put you here, or you can spend them telling me where the other women are." Rosa's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Because there were others, Karen. We both know that. And the difference between being a witness and being an accomplice is going to be measured in the next 8 minutes. Karen Pruitt's hand shook. The phone trembled against her ear. She lowered it. She looked at the outbuilding, at the bikers, at the woman in Colt's arms. "I didn't..." "He said they needed help. He said I was helping them. Where are the others?" There was only one other. Before Sarah. A woman named Diane. She was here for 2 months. Then Garrett moved her. "Where?" "A property near the lake, off Highway 42. I don't know the address. He never told me addresses. He gave me instructions. Check on them. Make sure they're eating. Give them the medication if they got anxious." Karen's voice broke into something ugly and honest. "He said it was care. He said they were sick. He said their families didn't want them, and he was the only one." "Did you believe that?" Karen looked at her hands. The hands that had administered medication through locked doors. The hands that had signed for medical supplies shipped to empty properties. The hands that had participated in something monstrous while telling themselves a story about mercy. "No," she whispered. "I didn't." Sirens. Distant but closing. The sound entered the darkness like a thread of light pulled through black fabric. Thin at first, then widening, then unmistakable. 2 vehicles. Maybe 3. The man from the outbuilding, the one who'd been loading the van, was sitting on the ground by the garage door, his back against the wall, his head down. Moth stood 10 feet away, watching him with the empty patience of a man who could stand in one spot for days without blinking. Colt carried Sarah to Rosa's truck. He set her in the passenger seat. He found a blanket behind the seat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was shaking, not from cold, not from shock, but from the physiological aftermath of captivity ending, the body's confused response to freedom after it had recalibrated itself for confinement. "Lily," she said. The name came out like something she'd been holding in her mouth for weeks, afraid to say it, because saying it made the absence real. "Is she really?" "She's really safe. She's in Fulton. She's with someone I trust. She's been asking about you since the moment I met her." Sarah's face crumpled. Not the beautiful crumpling of movie grief, the real crumpling, the ugly, shattered restructuring of a face that had been held together by nothing but will for 23 days and could finally stop holding. Garrett said, He said she was with a good family. He said if I cooperated, if I stayed quiet, he'd make sure Lily was taken care of. He said she couldn't finish. Her hands grabbed Colt's vest, not gently, with the ferocity of a drowning person seizing a rope. He put her with that man, with Dean. He lied. He lied about everything. I know. He was my family, my husband's brother. I trusted him. When Marcus died, Garrett was the one who helped me with the bills, helped me with the funeral, and then he started controlling everything, where I lived, who I talked to, when I could see my own daughter. He said it was for Lily's good. He said I couldn't handle it alone. And when I finally tried to leave, the sirens were close now. Red and blue lights strobed through the trees, painting the farmhouse, the outbuilding, the van, the bikers in alternating colors that made everything look like it was being photographed from multiple angles simultaneously. You don't have to explain tonight, Colt said. You don't have to explain anything tonight. I have to see her. Please, please, I have to see my daughter. You will. I promise. But the sheriff is here, and they need to see this place, and they need to hear Karen's statement, and if we leave before that happens, Garrett walks. Do you understand? If we don't finish this tonight, he does it again, to someone else. Sarah looked at him. Behind the exhaustion and the fear and the 23 days of darkness and locked doors and the slow erosion of everything she'd been before this room, there was something else. Something that had not been erased. The same thing Colt had seen in Lily. The unbreakable core of a person who had been bent past the breaking point and had somehow, through some mechanism of will or biology, or the particular stubbornness of women who have children depending on them, refused to snap. Finish it, she said. The cruisers pulled in. 3 of them. The sheriff, a woman, mid-50s, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who had been doing this job long enough to be angry about the things she'd seen, but professional enough to channel the anger into procedure, stepped out and took in the scene with one long, measuring look. Rosa met her at the driveway. They talked for 4 minutes. Rosa showed documents. Rosa pointed at the outbuilding. Rosa pointed at Karen Pruitt. Rosa pointed at the van full of boxes and bags and the dismantled evidence of a woman's captivity. The sheriff looked at the bikers. She looked at Colt. She looked at Sarah, wrapped in a blanket in the passenger seat of a truck, clutching a photograph. Who found her? The sheriff asked. We all did, Priest said. The sheriff held his gaze. She was assessing, not the threat, but the composition. 5 men in leather vests who had crossed a county in the dark to stand in a yard and not throw a punch, and not carry a weapon, and not do anything except be large and present and immovable while a woman was carried out of a concrete room. She was assessing, and whatever she measured, it registered as something other than what she'd expected. You'll need to give statements, she said. All of you. We're not going anywhere, Priest said. They weren't. They stood in the cold while the deputies processed the scene. They stood while Karen Pruitt was placed in the back of a cruiser, her face blank with the particular emptiness of someone whose story about themselves had just been demolished. They stood while the man from the outbuilding was handcuffed and identified. Travis Burke, a day laborer with a record of petty offenses who had been hired by Garrett Ashford 6 months ago for odd jobs that had gotten progressively less odd and more criminal. They stood while the outbuilding was photographed and documented, and the deadbolt on the interior door was measured, and the room where Sarah had spent 23 days was entered by deputies who came back out with faces that had changed. Colt gave his statement to a deputy who wrote everything down and asked good questions and didn't flinch at the answers. He told it from the beginning. The gas station, Lily, the bruises, Pruitt, Rosa's investigation, Garrett's call, the ride south. He told it straight and complete, and when he finished, the deputy looked at him and said, Why? Why what? Why any of it? She wasn't your kid. You could have ridden away. Colt thought about that. He thought about the highway and the rain and the gas station and the girl behind the chip rack with a bruise on her arm and a backpack full of everything she owned, which was almost nothing, which was everything. Because someone has to stay, he said, and I was the one who was there. The deputy nodded. He didn't understand. He didn't need to. It was past midnight when Rosa came to Colt with the update he'd been bracing for. Garrett isn't here. Wasn't here all night. His office in Steelville is closed. His truck isn't at his residence. The sheriff has issued a warrant, but He ran. He ran. Karen says he called her 2 hours before we arrived, told her to clean out the outbuilding and move Sarah. She says he sounded calm, controlled, not panicked, organized, like a man executing a contingency plan he'd rehearsed. Where would he go? That's what worries me. Rosa looked at Colt with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not concern, not fear, but the cold recognition of a variable that hadn't been accounted for. A man like Garrett doesn't run unless he has somewhere to run to, and he doesn't abandon an asset unless he's already secured a replacement. What are you saying? Rosa didn't answer immediately. She looked north, toward Fulton, toward the clubhouse, toward the room where a 5-year-old girl slept in a closet with a combat medic standing guard. He knows where Lily is, Rosa said. Colt's blood went cold. Not metaphorically. Physically. He felt the temperature drop in his veins, felt his hands go numb, felt his heart rate spike with the chemical urgency of a body preparing for something that his mind hadn't yet fully assembled, but his instinct had already identified. He pulled out his phone. He dialed Reno. It rang once, twice, 3 times, 4. Voicemail. He dialed again. The phone rang into nothing. Priest, Colt said. His voice came out wrong, too flat, too controlled. The voice of a man who was holding himself together by compressing everything he felt into a space too small to contain it. Reno's not answering. Priest's face changed. In 20 years of leadership, Priest had learned to read danger the way musicians read sheet music, by the spaces between the notes, by the silences that meant more than the sounds. Reno always answered. Reno slept with his phone on his chest because combat medics never really stopped being on call. Priest dialed. 4 rings. Voicemail. Boone was already moving toward his bike. Go, Priest said. To Colt. To Boone. To anyone who could ride. Now! Colt ran. His boots hit the frozen ground with the flat, desperate percussion of a man who had left a child in a farmhouse 55 minutes away and was now facing the possibility, the unbearable, unspeakable possibility, that his promise to come back was a promise that might be arriving too late. He hit the Softail's ignition. The engine caught. Boone was beside him, the street glide rumbling with the low, angry frequency of a machine that had been built for exactly this kind of urgency. Coyote was behind them. Hatchet. 4 bikes. Priest stayed. Someone had to stay with Sarah. Someone had to stay with the scene. The old man stood in the driveway as 4 engines roared to life and 4 headlights cut north toward the highway, and his hand was on his phone, and his phone was calling Reno, and Reno was not answering. And the sound of the bikes fading into the dark was the sound of a man watching his brothers ride toward something he couldn't see and couldn't stop and could only hope they would reach in time. Colt rode at 95. The speed limit was 55. The highway was empty. The night was a tunnel of darkness and headlight, and the yellow line blurring beneath him into a single unbroken thread that connected this moment to whatever was waiting at the other end. 40 minutes. At this speed, 40 minutes. He tried Reno again at the first straightaway. No answer. He tried a 3rd time at the county line. No answer. His mind did what minds do when fear overwhelms data. It built scenarios. Reno on the floor, Lily taken. The closet empty. The rabbit on the ground. The photograph gone because the photograph was with Colt, and Lily didn't have it, and she would think he hadn't come back, and the last thing she would know was that the tall man had taken her promise and ridden away into the dark and never returned. He rode faster. The engine screamed beneath him. The wind tore at his jacket. The scar on his neck burned with the cold, and he didn't feel it because the only thing he could feel was the distance, the terrible, measureless distance between where he was and where he needed to be. 30 minutes, 20. His phone buzzed in his jacket. He couldn't answer at this speed. He couldn't stop. Stopping was dying. Stopping was the gap between the promise and the failure. 15 minutes. 10. The gravel road appeared. He turned so hard the rear tire broke loose, and he caught it. Muscle memory, combat reflexes, the body doing what the mind couldn't because the mind was already inside the clubhouse, already in the hallway, already opening the closet door to find the clubhouse lights were on. Every light, every window, the porch light, the kitchen light. The upstairs hallway light that nobody ever turned on because the switch was broken and you had to jiggle it, all on. Colt killed the engine in the driveway. He was off the bike before it stopped rolling, his boots hitting gravel, his legs carrying him toward the porch, his hand hitting the front door, the door swinging open. Reno was on the kitchen floor. He was sitting up, conscious, holding a bag of frozen peas against the left side of his head. Blood had run from a cut above his ear and dried along his jaw in a dark, crooked line. His phone was on the floor beside him, the screen cracked, the battery dislodged. He looked at Colt. "He came through the back," Reno said. His voice was thick, concussed, the voice of a man speaking through gauze and adrenaline. "Hit me from behind. I didn't see his face. I heard the back door and then, where's Lily?" Reno's eyes went to the ceiling, to the stairs, to the hallway above. "She's in the closet," he said. "I heard her lock it from inside. Before I went down, I heard the lock click. She locked herself in." Colt took the stairs 3 at a time. The hallway was dark. The upstairs light was on, but the bulb in the hallway had burned out weeks ago and nobody had replaced it. He reached the door to Lily's room. It was open, the cot was empty, the blanket was on the floor, the closet door was closed. He knelt in front of it. His heart was hammering so loud he could hear it in his teeth. "Lily." Silence. "Lily, it's Colt. It's me. I came back." Silence. Then, breathing. Small, fast. The breathing of a creature that had gone to ground and was trying to decide if the voice on the other side of the wood was safety or the next iteration of danger. "I came back," he said again. "I promised, and I came back. Open the door, kid. Please." The lock clicked. The door opened. She was in the corner, behind the boots, behind Reno's jacket. The bear in one arm, the rabbit in the other. Her face was wet, and her eyes were wild, and her entire body was vibrating with the sustained terror of a child who had heard violence downstairs and had done the only thing she knew how to do. She had made herself small, she had found a door, and she had locked it. She looked at Colt. She looked at his face, his eyes, his hands. She checked, the way she always checked, to see if he was real, if he was staying, if the door he represented was still unlocked. He was real. He was staying. The door was open. She launched herself at him, not gently, with the full-body, uncoordinated desperation of a 5-year-old who had used up her entire reserve of bravery and had nothing left except the need to be held by someone who had come back. She hit his chest, and her arms went around his neck, and her face buried into the leather of his vest, and she made a sound, not crying, not screaming, just the low, continuous hum of a child vibrating at the frequency of relief. Colt wrapped his arms around her. He held her against his chest. He closed his eyes. Downstairs, boots on the porch. Boone's voice, clipped and tactical. Coyote checking windows. Hatchet moving through the back of the house, clearing rooms with the silent efficiency of a man who had been clearing rooms since before some of these men were born. And on the gravel road, growing louder, the sound of an engine. Not a motorcycle, a truck, moving fast. Headlights sweeping through the kitchen windows. Boone's voice from below, tight and cold, and carrying the particular edge of a man who had spent his life identifying threats, and had just identified one. "He's here." The truck stopped 20 feet from the porch. The headlights stayed on, twin beams cutting through the dark, pinning the front of the clubhouse in white light that turned every window into a mirror and every shadow into a hiding place. The engine idled. The driver's door didn't open. Colt came down the stairs with Lily in his arms. She had her face pressed into his neck, her fingers locked behind his head, her body curled against his chest with the compact rigidity of a child who had decided that this man was the perimeter and everything outside of him was hostile territory. "Stay here," he said to her. She shook her head against his neck. Not refusal, impossibility. She could not let go. Her hands would not open. The muscles in her arms had locked with the involuntary certainty of a body that had learned, through repetition and pain, that letting go of safety was how you ended up back in the dark. Colt looked at Reno. Reno was on his feet now, the frozen peas abandoned, blood still dried along his jaw, his eyes focused with the pharmaceutical clarity of adrenaline overriding concussion. He crossed the kitchen and held out his arms. "Lily," Reno said. His voice was steady, warm. The voice of a man who had talked soldiers through field surgery and could talk a 5-year-old through the end of the world. I need you to come to me for 1 minute, just 1 minute. Then Colt is coming right back. She looked at Reno. She looked at his face. The cut above his ear, the blood on his jaw, the calm in his eyes that hadn't broken even when his body had. "He hurt you," she whispered. "Yeah, but I'm still here, and that's how you know I'm not going anywhere." She loosened her grip, slowly, one finger at a time. She let Reno take her, and when she settled against his chest, she turned her head so she could still see Colt, watching, checking, measuring the distance between the man and the door, calculating whether this was the moment the promise finally broke. Colt walked to the porch. Boone was already there, standing to the right of the doorframe with his back against the wall and his eyes on the truck. Hatchet was at the left. Coyote was behind them, inside the door, holding a phone that was dialing 911. "One person in the vehicle," Boone said. "Driver's side. No movement from the passenger side." The driver's door opened. Garrett Ashford stepped into his own headlights. He was taller than Colt had imagined from Rosa's description. 6 feet, lean, with the groomed stillness of a man who had cultivated respectability the way farmers cultivate fields, patiently, systematically, with the understanding that appearances were crops that required tending. He wore a dark overcoat over pressed clothes. His shoes were clean. His hair was combed. He looked like a man arriving at a business meeting, not a man who had driven 55 miles in the middle of the night to recover a 5-year-old girl from a building full of bikers. That was the most frightening thing about him, the normalcy, the composure, the absolute unshakable presentation of a man who had locked women in concrete rooms and still managed to button his collar straight. "Mr. Mercer," Garrett said. His voice carried across the gravel with the practiced projection of a man who is used to being heard. "I believe we spoke on the phone." "We did." "I've come for my niece." "No." Garrett looked at the porch, at Boone, at Hatchet, at the shapes of men in the doorway behind them. He processed the scene the way he processed everything. With calculation, not emotion, the arithmetic of a man assessing whether the current configuration of power could be rearranged through the tools he had available. "I have a court order," Garrett said. He reached into his coat. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Boone said. His voice was flat and absolute, the voice of a man who had given that instruction in places where the consequences of disobedience were measured in caliber. Garrett paused. He withdrew his hand slowly, holding a folded document between 2 fingers. "Emergency Kinship Custody Order, signed by Judge Halloran in Crawford County. It grants me immediate temporary custody of Lily Ashford as her nearest living relative." He held the paper out. Nobody took it. "That order was signed before tonight," Colt said. "Before the sheriff in Bell found Sarah locked in your building. Before Karen Pruitt gave her statement. Before your hired man was arrested. That order is paperwork from a world that doesn't exist anymore, Garrett. That world ended about 2 hours ago." Something moved behind Garrett's composure. Not much. A micro-adjustment. The smallest recalibration of a face that had been engineered for control. But Colt saw it, and Boone saw it, and Hatchet saw it, and Hatchet shifted his weight in a way that was almost imperceptible, but that communicated to anyone fluent in the language of physical readiness that the next thing that happened would be determined by the next thing Garrett did with his hands. "I don't know what you think happened in Bell," Garrett said, "but I can assure you Sarah is alive." The words hit Garrett's composure like a stone hitting glass. The crack was small but visible, a widening of the eyes by a fraction, a tightening of the jaw that lasted half a second before the mask reconstructed itself. But the crack had been there, and everyone on the porch had seen it. "Sarah is... That's wonderful news. Where is she? She told us everything." Garrett stopped talking. The composure held, but it was holding differently now. Not with the easy confidence of a man in control, but with the rigid, mechanical tension of a man who was running out of scripts and hadn't rehearsed the one required for this particular audience. "Mr. Mercer, I came here in good faith. You came here because you're out of options." Colt stepped off the porch. 1 step. Close enough now that the headlights threw his shadow behind him, and Garrett's shadow behind Garrett, and the 2 shadows stretched across the gravel in opposite directions, like the two possible outcomes of this conversation. You ran from Bell because you knew the sheriff was coming. You drove here because Lily is the last piece, the last person who connects you to Pruitt, to Karen, to Sarah, to all of it. You need her because as long as she's in the system, she's a witness. She's the girl who can say Uncle Garrett sent the man with the bad breath. She's the girl who heard you tell her mother that nobody leaves without you knowing. Garrett's face went still. Not calm, empty. The particular emptiness of a man who has been narrating his own story for so long that hearing someone else narrate it accurately is a form of violence he has no defense against. "You're making a mistake," Garrett said. But his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The concern was gone. What remained was the substrate, the flat, transactional tone of a man who had never actually felt the emotions he performed and was now standing in the cold without the costume. "The mistake was yours," Colt said. "It was driving here." Sirens. Again. Closer this time, not from the south but from the east, from Fulton, from the direction Coyote's 911 call had traveled through dispatchers and patrol units and the middle-of-the-night machinery of a system that, for once, was moving in the right direction. Garrett heard the sirens. His eyes went to the road. The calculation was visible, the same flickering math that Colt had seen in Dean Pruitt's face at the gas station, the arithmetic of a man weighing his remaining options and finding that the column had gone to zero. He took a step backward, toward the truck. "Don't," Boone said. Garrett took another step. His hand went to the truck's door handle. What happened next took 4 seconds and would be described differently by every man who witnessed it. Garrett pulled the door open. Boone moved off the porch with a speed that contradicted his age and his size and every assumption that Garrett had made about the men standing between him and the thing he wanted. Hatchet moved simultaneously, not toward Garrett, but toward the front of the truck, positioning himself between the vehicle and the road with the immovable certainty of a man who had decided that this truck was not leaving and had made that decision with his body. Garrett got 1 foot into the truck. Boone reached the door at the same moment and placed his hand on it, not slamming it, not pulling it, just holding it open with a grip that communicated through pressure and proximity and the absolute stillness of his arm that the door would move when Boone decided it would move and not before. "You can drive away," Boone said. His face was 6 inches from Garrett's. His voice was barely above a whisper. "But you'll be driving towards sirens, not away from them. And when they stop you, and they will stop you, you'll be a man fleeing a scene where his niece was held in a motorcycle club against her will. That's the story you'll be telling. Is that the story you want?" Garrett looked at Boone, and for the first time his composure didn't just crack. It dissolved. The face beneath it was not frightened. It was not angry. It was bewildered. The genuine, undiluted bewilderment of a man who had built an entire architecture of control and was watching it come apart, not through violence, not through legal maneuvering, not through any of the mechanisms he understood, but through the simple, unglamorous refusal of men who would not move. His hand came off the door handle. He stepped back. He stood in the headlights of his own truck with his arms at his sides and the court order crumpled in his fist and the sirens growing louder, and he waited for the thing he had spent years making sure would never arrive. Accountability. The Fulton police cruiser pulled into the gravel lot at 2:47 a.m. The officer who stepped out had already been briefed by dispatch. The situation in Bell, the warrant for Garrett Ashford, the 911 call from the clubhouse. He took in the scene with the measured gaze of a man who had been trained to prioritize and had immediately identified his priority. Garrett went quietly, not with dignity, with the mechanical compliance of a man whose operating system had crashed and who was running on nothing but muscle memory. He was read his rights. He was placed in the cruiser. He did not look at the clubhouse. He did not look at the porch where Colt stood watching. He looked straight ahead, through the windshield, at a future that had been foreclosed by the testimony of a nurse on a porch, and a woman in a blanket, and a trail of paper that Rosa Bennett had followed through 4 counties like thread through a labyrinth. The cruiser pulled away. The taillights shrank down the gravel road and turned onto the highway and disappeared. The sirens went silent. The night came back, dark, cold, enormous, and for the first time since Colt had stopped at a gas station on Route 54, quiet in a way that felt like permission. Inside the clubhouse, Lily was asleep. She'd fallen asleep in Reno's arms during the confrontation. Not from comfort, but from exhaustion. The total systemic shutdown of a body that had burned through every reserve of adrenaline and cortisol in childhood endurance and had simply stopped, the way a machine stops when the fuel runs out, not gradually but all at once. Reno was sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet and the girl across his lap and the frozen peas melting beside him and an expression on his face that contained more than any language had words for. Colt knelt beside them. He looked at Lily's face, slack with sleep, the muscles around her eyes finally unclenched, the small crease between her eyebrows. The crease that had been there since the gas station, the permanent furrow of a child who had learned to worry before she'd learned to read, had smoothed. "She asked about you twice," Reno said quietly. "Both times I told her you were right outside. Both times she said okay and closed her eyes." "Thank you." "Don't." Reno's voice roughened. "Don't thank me like I did you a favor. This wasn't a favor. This was the first thing I've done since I came home that felt like the thing I was supposed to do." Colt took Lily from Reno's arms. She didn't wake. She shifted, her head finding the hollow between his shoulder and his neck, her hand finding the edge of his vest, and she settled with the deep, unconscious certainty of a child who had finally found the place where sleep was safe. He carried her upstairs. He laid her on the cot. Not in the closet, on the cot. He pulled the blanket up. He set the rabbit beside her. He set the bear beside the rabbit. He sat on the floor next to the cot and listened to her breathe. And he did not move until dawn came through the window and turned the room from black to gray to the pale gold of a Missouri morning that didn't know yet what had happened in the dark. Priest arrived at 7 with Sarah. He'd driven Rosa's truck because Rosa had stayed in Bell to work with the sheriff's investigators. Sarah was in the passenger seat, wrapped in the same blanket, wearing borrowed clothes, one of Rosa's flannels, a pair of jeans that didn't quite fit, and holding the photograph against her chest the way she'd been holding it since Colt had given it back to her 5 hours ago. Colt was on the porch when the truck pulled in. He'd heard the engine from a quarter-mile away because he'd been listening for it since sunrise, measuring every sound against the one he was waiting for, the way soldiers measure every sound against the one that means relief is coming. Sarah got out of the truck slowly. Her legs were unsteady. 3 weeks of confinement had taken something from them that would take months to return. She stood on the gravel and looked at the clubhouse, the converted farmhouse with the metal shop out back, the row of bikes under the corrugated awning, the wooden sign above the door that said nothing, the porch, where a man in a leather vest stood with coffee in his hand and an expression on his face that she would remember for the rest of her life because it was the expression of someone who had kept a promise that the world had given him every reason to break. "She's inside?" Sarah asked. "Upstairs, still sleeping." Sarah took a step toward the door. Then she stopped. Her hand went to her face. Not crying, not yet, but the anticipatory gesture of a woman preparing for an emotion that she knew would be larger than her body could contain. "What if she doesn't?" Sarah's voice broke. "It's been weeks. She was with that man. What if she's different? What if she doesn't?" "She has your photograph in her backpack," Colt said. "She takes it out every night. She holds it while she sleeps. She gave it to me so I could find you because she said it was the most powerful thing she owned." He set down his coffee. "She hasn't stopped waiting for you, not for 1 second." Sarah made a sound that was half breath and half collapse. She walked up the porch steps. Colt opened the door. She went inside. Colt stayed on the porch. This was not his moment. This moment belonged to a woman and a girl and the space between them. The space that had been filled with concrete walls and locked doors and 23 days of silence, and was now about to be filled with the only thing that could repair it. He heard Sarah's footsteps on the stairs, slow, careful, the footsteps of a woman approaching the thing she wanted most in the world and was terrified to reach. He heard the bedroom door open. He heard nothing for 10 seconds, 20, 30, a silence so complete that even the birds outside seemed to recognize it as something that should not be interrupted. Then he heard Lily's voice, small, fractured, carrying the entire weight of every night in the closet with the photograph and the rabbit and the promise. "Mommy?" and then a sound that came through the walls and the floor and the old wood of the farmhouse and reached Colt on the porch and hit him in the chest like something physical. The sound of a mother and a daughter meeting each other again after a separation that should have been permanent and wasn't. The sound of arms closing around a small body. The sound of breathing becoming crying, becoming laughing, becoming breathing again. The sound of two people discovering that the worst thing that had ever happened to them was over, and they were both still here. Colt sat down on the porch step. He put his face in his hands, and he wept. Not silently, not stoically, not the way men are supposed to weep in stories where they're supposed to be strong. He wept the way he'd wept on the motorcycle the first night, openly, messily, with the full-bodied surrender of a man who had carried something too heavy for too long and had finally set it down. Priest sat beside him. He said nothing. He just sat there, his shoulder touching Colt's shoulder, his presence the only language required. After a while, Colt stopped. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at the road. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now the hard part," Priest said. "The system catches up. Rosa works with the investigators. The DA builds a case. Garrett and Pruitt and Karen and the man from the outbuilding face charges. Sarah and Lily enter a process. Victim advocacy, witness protection protocols, housing assistance, the whole apparatus. And us? We go back to being what we are. A motorcycle club in Fulton, Missouri that fixes bikes and minds its own business." Priest paused. "Mostly. And Lily?" "Lily goes with her mother, where she belongs." Colt knew this, had known it since the gas station, had known it with the clarity of a man who understood that the purpose of protection was not possession, that the whole point of standing between someone and the dark was to make the dark small enough that they could face it without you, but knowing and feeling, always that border. "I'm going to miss that kid," he said. "I know." She locked herself in a closet when Garrett's man came. She was alone in the dark and she locked the door and she waited. 5 years old and she didn't scream. She didn't run. She locked the door. "Because you taught her that locked doors could be safe ones." Colt looked at Priest. The old man's eyes were wet but steady. The eyes of a man who had learned over 62 years and 3 wars and a lifetime of riding that strength was not the absence of tears, but the willingness to keep going while they fell. The days that followed moved slowly, the way days move when the adrenaline is gone and reality returns with its paperwork and its phone calls and its insistence that survival is not an ending but a beginning that requires maintenance. Rosa Bennett spent 4 days working with the county investigators. Her files, the property records, the LLC filings, the utility accounts, the tenant histories, became the backbone of a case that would eventually result in 17 felony charges against Garrett Ashford. Karen Pruitt cooperated. Travis Burke cooperated. The other woman, Diane, the one Karen had mentioned, was found alive at the property near Highway 42, malnourished and frightened but alive. And her testimony added another layer to the architecture of Garrett's dismantling. Patricia Holm came to the clubhouse 3 days after Sarah's return. She brought paperwork, not the kind that takes children away, but the kind that puts them back. Emergency custody restoration. Sarah Ashford was Lily's mother. The system had failed them both and was now, with the particular slowness of institutions correcting their own errors, trying to make it right. Patricia looked at Colt when she handed Sarah the papers. "I owe you an apology," she said. "No, you don't. I told you this wasn't how it works. You showed me it should be. It shouldn't take 5 bikers and a retired detective to protect one kid. No, it shouldn't." Patricia's jaw tightened with the particular frustration of a woman who worked inside a system she believed in and was constantly confronted with evidence of its limitations. "But it did. And she's safe because you didn't wait for the system to work." She left. Colt watched her sedan pull away and thought about all the Lilies in all the gas stations who didn't have a biker standing by the chip rack at the right moment, and the thought was unbearable, so he stopped thinking it and went inside and made hot chocolate, because that was a thing he could do, and doing was better than thinking. Boone came back on the 4th day. He rode into the gravel lot at sunset, killed his engine, and sat on his bike for a full minute before dismounting. He walked to the porch where Colt was sitting and stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets and his jaw working and the particular tension of a man preparing to say something that cost him. "I was wrong," Boone said. "You weren't all wrong." "I was wrong about the part that mattered." Boone looked at the yard where Lily was chasing Coyote's shadow across the grass while Coyote pretended not to notice. "She looks like mine. Did Priest tell you?" "Yeah. My daughter, Emma. She was 7. Boone's voice was flat and careful, each word placed like a foot on unstable ground. "I spent 10 years making sure nothing that reminded me of her could get close enough to hurt. I built walls. I called it discipline. I called it protecting the club." He swallowed. "I called it everything except what it was." "What was it?" "Being afraid that caring about another kid would mean losing another kid." Boone watched Lily stop chasing shadows and start drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. "I'm sorry, Colt. Not for raising the concerns. The concerns were real. For the reason behind them." Colt looked at Boone. The scar from ear to chin, the eyes that had seen 3 theaters of operation, the hands that had been trained to dismantle and build and dismantle again, the hands of a man who had just disassembled his own defenses and was standing in the open without them. "You came back when it mattered," Colt said. "That's the part I'm keeping." Boone nodded. He didn't smile. He wasn't built for smiling. But something in his posture released, the way a spring releases when the pressure holding it is removed, and he sat down on the porch step beside Colt, and they watched Lily draw circles until the sun went down. Sarah and Lily stayed at the clubhouse for 2 weeks. Not because they had nowhere to go. Rosa had arranged temporary housing through a victim advocacy network, but because Sarah needed time. Time to eat meals at a table without listening for footsteps. Time to sleep in a room with a door that locked from the inside. Time to watch her daughter interact with men in leather vests who had engine grease under their fingernails and combat medals in their dresser drawers, and who treated Lily with the careful, instinctive gentleness of people who understood that broken things require patience, not force. Hatchet built Lily a small wooden stool so she could reach the kitchen sink. He didn't ask. He didn't announce it. He just measured her height one morning with a piece of string and appeared the next day with a stool that had her name carved into the top in letters that weren't beautiful, but were precise. The way everything Hatchet made was precise, because precision was his language, and this was the longest sentence he'd spoken in years. Moth taught Lily 3 words in Pashto. She repeated them incorrectly, and he corrected her gently. And she repeated them incorrectly again, and he laughed. Actually laughed. A sound so rare that Reno came out of the kitchen to see if something was wrong. And Lily laughed because he was laughing, and the sound of it filled the hallway like something warm being poured into a cold space. Webb balanced the books and found money. Not much. The club wasn't rich, but enough for a fund. He called it the Operational Reserve. Everyone knew what it was for. Nobody made him say it out loud. Digger drove Sarah to 3 appointments: doctor, dentist, legal aid. He didn't talk during the drives. He didn't need to. He just drove, his prosthetic leg working the pedals with the mechanical reliability of a man who had lost a limb and gained an understanding of what it meant to rebuild from the part of yourself that remained. Coyote gave Lily the bear. Then he bought her a second bear, then a third. Reno told him to stop buying bears. Coyote bought a 4th one and hid it in the closet where Lily would find it, which she did, and she named it Coyote, which made the real Coyote walk outside and stand in the yard for a long time with his face turned up to the sky and his sobriety holding steady at 2 years and 47 days. On the 15th day, Sarah came to Colt on the porch. It was morning. The air smelled like frost and coffee, and the particular cleanness that Missouri gets in autumn when the humidity breaks and the world goes sharp and clear. "We're leaving tomorrow," she said. He'd known it was coming, had felt it approaching the way you feel weather approaching. In the pressure, in the light, in the small changes that accumulate until the large change arrives. The housing through Rosa's network? A small place outside Columbia, 2 bedrooms. There's a school nearby, and a counselor who works with kids who've been through... She stopped, rearranged the sentence. A counselor who helps kids feel safe again. That's good. Columbia's a good town. It's 45 minutes away. I know. Sarah looked at him. Not the way she'd looked at him in the outbuilding, not with the raw, desperate gratitude of a woman being carried out of darkness. This look was different, slower, deeper. The look of a woman who had spent 2 weeks watching a man be kind to her daughter and was trying to find a word for what that kindness meant and couldn't, because the word hadn't been invented yet, because some things exist before language gets around to naming them. You saved us, she said. A lot of people saved you. Rosa, Priest, every man in this club. They helped. You stayed. Sarah's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. Lily asked me last night if you were coming with us. I told her you had your own life. She said your life was here, but your heart was with us. Sarah half smiled, the way people half smile when children say things that are too true for adults to say. She's 5 and she already knows how this works. Colt looked at the road, the highway beyond the gravel, the horizon that had always been his destination, the vanishing point that moved as you moved, the promise of somewhere else that kept you riding because riding was easier than arriving. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I'm not asking you to. I know, but I'm saying it anyway. 45 minutes is nothing. I've ridden through worse than 45 minutes to get to places that mattered a lot less than where you'll be. Sarah reached out and put her hand on his forearm. Not grabbing, resting. The weight of her hand was almost nothing. It was the heaviest thing he'd felt since the war. You're welcome any time, she said. Both of you. She glanced at the Softail parked at the end of the row, chrome catching the morning light. All of you. They left the next morning. Sarah drove a used Honda that Webb had found through a friend of a friend and that the club had paid for from the operational reserve that everyone knew wasn't an operational reserve. The back seat was full. Suitcases, the stuffed rabbit, 4 bears, the wooden stool Hatchet had built, a bag of groceries that Reno had packed with the meticulous attention of a man provisioning a field hospital. Lily stood in the gravel lot and looked at the row of bikes. She looked at the clubhouse. She looked at each man. Priest on the porch, Boone by the shop, Hatchet in the doorway, Moth by the window, Webb with his hands in his pockets, Digger leaning on his truck, Coyote pretending he wasn't crying, Reno pretending he didn't see Coyote crying. Then she looked at Colt. She walked to him. She reached into her backpack, the same pink backpack, faded, one strap held together with a safety pin that Reno had provided, and she pulled out the photograph. The water-stained, creased, handled-to-softness photograph of her mother that had traveled from a locked room to a gas station, to a closet, to a motorcycle, to a farmhouse in Bell, and back again. She held it up to Colt. You keep it, she said. That's yours. I have my mom now. You need it more. She pushed the photograph into his hand. So you remember where to find us. Colt took the photograph. He looked at it. The dark-haired woman smiling at the camera. The 4 words on the back, written in a hand that shook. I will come back. A promise that had been made by a mother, kept by a stranger, and was now being returned by a 5-year-old girl who had learned, against all evidence and all odds, that promises were real things that real people kept. He knelt down. Lily put her arms around his neck. She held on, not with desperation this time, but with the slow, deliberate pressure of a child who had learned that holding on was something you could do without being afraid of the letting go, because letting go didn't mean losing. It meant trusting that the person would still be there when you reached for them again. Every Sunday, he said. Every Sunday, she repeated. She pulled back. She looked at him with the gravity that only 5-year-olds and combat veterans share. The total unironic seriousness of someone who understands that life is not a thing to be taken lightly. Pinky? She said. He held out his smallest finger. She wrapped hers around it. Every Sunday, he said again. She nodded. She let go. She walked to the Honda and climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in with the competent focus of a child who was preparing for a journey and was not afraid of where it was going. Sarah started the car. She looked at Colt through the window. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. The look was the wave. The acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid and didn't need to be because it had never been a transaction in the first place. It had been a choice. A man at a gas station choosing to stay. That was the whole story. The Honda pulled down the gravel road. The men watched it go. Nobody spoke. The taillights reached the highway, turned left, and disappeared into the morning traffic heading east toward Columbia, toward 2 bedrooms and a school and a counselor and a life that would be difficult and imperfect and full of the hard daily work of recovery, and that would also be, for the first time in a very long time, safe. Colt stood in the driveway for a long time after the car disappeared. The photograph was in his vest pocket, against his chest, where leather and paper and scar tissue pressed together. The morning was cold and clear, and the coffee was getting stale, and the bikes needed maintenance, and the shop needed opening, and the world was still the world, broken and indifferent and producing men like Garrett Ashford in endless supply. But it also produced gas stations where strangers stopped in the rain. It produced retired detectives who worked for free. It produced combat medics who cut the crusts off sandwiches. It produced men who carved stools and bought bears and laughed in Pashto with 5-year-old girls who pronounced everything wrong and made the mispronunciation sound like the right way to say it. Priest came to the porch with 2 mugs. He handed one to Colt. They drank in silence. "You riding today?" Priest asked. Colt looked at the highway, at the Softail, at the road that had always been his escape and was now, for the first time, just a road. A strip of asphalt that went places and came back and didn't need to mean anything more than that. "Yeah," he said. "I'm riding." "Where?" Colt thought about a small apartment outside Columbia, 45 minutes east, 2 bedrooms. A girl who drew circles in the frost and kept her promises in a pink backpack and had given away the most powerful thing she owned because she didn't need it anymore. "I'll be back by dinner," he said. He walked to the Softail. He kicked the engine to life. The sound rolled across the gravel lot and scattered into the morning. Not a roar, not a warning, just the steady mechanical heartbeat of a machine that was built to go somewhere and was finally being ridden by a man who knew where that was. He pulled onto the highway. The wind hit his face. The scar on his neck didn't burn. The road unwound in front of him, yellow line and open sky, and the particular silence that comes from 70 miles an hour when you're not running from anything but riding towards something. In his vest pocket, the photograph pressed against his chest. On the back, 4 words in a mother's shaking hand. "I will come back." He did, every Sunday, without fail. Until the road between Fulton and Columbia became the most worn stretch of highway in Callaway County, and the sound of a Harley engine on a Sunday morning became the sound that a little girl ran toward instead of away from. And the man who rode it became the man who always returned, who always stayed, who had found the thing that every outlaw spends his life pretending he doesn't need. A place to come back to, a family that leaves the porch light on.